it me, Ben, or are we on tilt? Yeah,
Oh,
part two.
oh man, you're right. Oh, we are back, everybody, to conclude our negativity-filled discussion about the short-lived ESPN TV series Tilt. I'm Legend of Ben on Poker Stars.
And I'm East Coast Sam on Poker Stars. So don't worry. We know we talked last time about how the previously on Tilt segment lasted for 2 minutes. So we're going to keep it very brief this time and just get right into it. Yeah.
So, briefly, we had, and just to recap last time, I had said how it was the worst pilot of television I'd ever seen in my entire life. Mm-hmm. Episode 2 was just as bad, and I thought that there was one part of episode 3 that had even the slightest bit of promise that was not ultimately carried out well by the end of it. So my expectations were obviously not very high as we were heading into watch episode 4 of Tilt, The Aftermath.
Yep, and to actually go over what happens in the story, so we have 3 main characters. We have Eddie, Clark, and Miami. Eddie has gotten into the Matador, who's played by Michael Madsen and is the marquee person in the show, has gotten into his social circle and is now working with the Matador to help him win pots and stuff behind closed doors. Clark has gotten money from a man who resembles Hayden Christensen, and that will kind of pay off as the season progresses.
Miami has conversations with random guys at various points in time that have no connection to anything else.
Yep. And then we have this cop, better known as Sad Sack or Grumpy Cat, who is investigating the Matador to get revenge on him for killing his brother. He has met Seymour, who is the older mentor of the 3 main characters, who has brought them together for some reason, all 3 of them, to get revenge on the Matador for beating him up in an episode that occurred in Miami's childhood. He's also met Eddie and has confronted him about working for the Matador. But as of yet, his storyline has not quite intersected with the other 3. And there's also a bunch of casino executives doing things, talking about business. And then at the end of the 3rd episode, Seymour has died. Who killed him? Did he die in an accident falling onto a slot machine in a casino in front of hundreds of people? What will happen next in the story?
Yeah, so once again, we have the return of the quote-unquote useless scene. There is some slight plot momentum of Seymour's death. Technically, I mean, the cop starts to investigate the situation of how he fell off the stairs or off the upper level of the casino. And as you would expect, you would expect Miami to kind of be emotionally affected by his passing. And really, we get kind of some pretty lame cliche scenes. Her playing poker and her being emotionally affected by his death, like she's playing badly because he died, because she's not, herself mentally. And there's this pretty awful hand right at the top of the episode where Miami has ace queen. She checks the flop in the dark. We never actually see her cards, and then the other guy makes the nuts, and there's just this terrible pan shot of her face as she shoves all in. And then when she actually gets up from the table, she picks up some of the chips, but not all of them, and just leaves a full house. Like, made no sense in any level.
Yeah, it's trying to present information about the scene to Miami in a creative way. Like Clark and Eddie already know about it, and they say to themselves, "We got to go and tell Miami." But it's supposed to show that Miami gets the information differently. And the dialogue just comes off as really clunky. At one point, Seymour is described as, and I'm not kidding, some guy who forgot to take a serotonin cocktail, which is a really odd and flowery way to describe a guy who just died, apparently in a suicide. And yeah, it's very awkward. You would think that they would go directly to Miami, especially because Clark knows that Miami had this connection to Seymour back when she was 12 years old. They think that she would get this information directly, a phone call or something. It's very odd.
Very odd. I don't think our description of these episodes will necessarily do them justice for just how awful they are. Because when I say it in my notes, I just multiple times would write useless scene. I didn't even write what the scene was about. I just sort of just put that there as a placeholder in my notes for like, this scene has no importance to anything in the plot. And this scene technically doesn't really need to exist because there's a later hand of Miami playing poker and losing chips little bit by little bit, and then just the problem is, of course, we don't actually see how she played the hands badly. Like if you run into the nuts when you have the second nuts, it doesn't really matter if your mentor died. You're going to lose money anyway, so it doesn't really play out as you would expect from a thematic standpoint either.
Yeah, and a montage sequence with poker, as we talked about with All In, where we see Ace there in a montage with her confusing faces losing a bunch of chips. It doesn't land emotionally. Again, as I mentioned, poker tournaments and television, for that matter, play out slowly and episodically, and that gives you an opportunity to really let the drama sink in and the character dynamics sink in. But because the show is so fast-paced, we have this fast-paced montage, nothing lands very well. We really don't, and she's not trying to be mean to the actress who plays Miami, but she does not do a good job selling emotional material. There's a scene before this montage happens where she goes to Seymour's apartment hotel room thing. She like takes a gun out of a safe that he's got, and you think she's going to go kill the matador or something. And intellectually, you're thinking, okay, this is supposed to be a tense scene, but just the acting just isn't there. It doesn't. There's no landing.
And I can almost forgive the episode for at least trying to tell that part of the story, but then it has to shoehorn in Bud Light product placement, the Matador playing online poker very randomly, just out of nowhere. Not to mention, this is really kind of where, for me, the true beginning of like just the most useless, pointless tangent of Clark's character's arc of the season, where he starts being forced into having to money launder his friend from college's like dirty money from like a dark client that's trying to keep the business off the books. Like it just really has no place in this episode when it's literally called The Aftermath. And it's, you really want the plot to slow down for a minute here. You've had the first couple episodes. You want to have maybe one episode to breathe and like really focus on one dramatic section of the narrative, and it just fails miserably to do so.
Yeah, I can't underestimate how terrible this Clark subplot is. The cop subplot is really bad because Chris Bauer can't act and has a very thin character, and it's very hard to tell if you're supposed to root for the cop or not. It seems like you are, but then he does all these terrible things throughout it. The Clark subplot is, to me, the equivalent of the undocumented immigrant subplot in All In. It's just this very strange storyline, doesn't make really any sense. And I understand they want to give Clark something to do, but also the directions this particular subplot goes in over these next episodes is just absolutely bizarre. I mean, we have this scene in episode 3 where Clark goes to this guy who I just call Hayden Christensen and says, hey, I need some money. And Hayden Christensen says, you know what, Clark, you helped us out with this company. I'll give you $10K, but get out of my face. That's sort of the effect of the scene. They had this rapport in the past. He's doing him one last favor, and that's the end of it. So you wouldn't expect this character to come back into the story. But here he comes, and it's like, hey, you better launder money for me. Why? Do you want something to do with this guy? Do you really think this is a good strategy to gamble with this guy who you don't seem to trust very much? And again, just wait for all the other plot developments with this, because it's just terrible.
I mean, the logic of it makes no sense. It's completely disconnected thematically and narratively speaking. From like Clark never talks about this with Eddie or with Miami or even Seymour when Seymour was alive. It exists in an entirely different narrative ecosystem and does not tell us anything more about Clark's character. Doesn't tie into his past of his father. Doesn't resolve anything from his college, getting in trouble with the law passed, besides the fact that he has a criminal record. And it's also unrelated to the Matador or unrelated to the poker. So it just literally has no place in the edit. I mean, this is stuff that I felt like should have just been deleted scenes, really. And they just keep bringing it back. But even calling it bringing it back in the episodes, it's just more like it just goes on a different tangent instead of like staying on the same line. It's completely out of balance with everything else, which is already out of balance to begin with.
Yeah, I mean, it's a guy being chased. We have this scene where Hayden Christensen says, all right, you got to launder money for me. There's a scene later on where Hayden Christensen's, I believe, with some other guy, and they're talking to Clark. And it turns out that the guy that they're laundering money for is being pursued by the DEA. And they kind of just throw this in. It's like, well, what are you two doing with this drug dealer? And why is it? I mean, you guys are legitimate finance people with a company. Can't you just launder the money through your own company or getting a loan or something? And then there's another scene where Clark has played with this money and he has a bunch of chips and he's going to cash out, and he opts not to cash out. There's like a person standing there who's kind of like eyeing him, but that doesn't mean that he's being chased by the police or somebody. It's just so weird. It's just so strange.
Not to mention, we don't really know what not cashing out the chips really means. Does it mean he's pocketing the money? Does it mean he's going to gamble with it? Is it going to be part of the Matador plan? Is it going to be he's going to return it to the friend? Like, we don't know. They don't really follow up on that, so we don't know what that whole scene really means in the grand scheme of things. And not to mention, it is still completely unrelated to everything else. Eddie's barely in this episode. He's probably in this episode the least out of all 9 episodes. He just kind of pops in here and there for a small scene here and there. I'm going back to Miami here because she does have a scene with Clark where Clark says she's playing bad after she wins a hand of bluff. But if she's winning, how can you say she's playing bad? Bluffing is part of poker. It's called outplaying your opponent for a reason. You're going to bluff sometimes, and you're going to win hands with the best hand sometimes. And considering that all we've seen up to this point was them winning cooler versus cooler, that's at least showing some poker prowess to pull off a 6-5 bluff, for example. Besides this, we have just such an uninteresting investigation done by Sad Sack here, because as he's investigating Seymour's death, it's just not interesting. There's no plot twist to the investigation. He's just kind of interviewing people, and we know that obviously the Matador's crew is behind it, so it doesn't really matter which part of the crew does it, because none of the crew just kind of is its own little block of characters that don't have individual agency anyway.
Yeah, so he finds out first off that Seymour has died while he's interviewing some guy in a hotel room, and it's just on the television. It just mentions that this guy died, which again is a very cliched way of showing this happen. It would have been a lot more intense if maybe the cops saw it or something, and maybe he saw Tropical Henry run away, and that sort of triggers his imagination or something. But it just piecemeal throughout this episode, we get him interviewing a bunch of people. He interviews this cleaning lady, he interviews this bellboy, he interviews just all these people, and slowly and steadily, you get information that Tropical Henry and then the cash game guy killed Seymour. Again, which, as I mentioned this in our last episode, throwing somebody over the ledge of like the 3rd or 4th floor of a casino is, I think, the worst way to kill somebody, because you have all these witnesses and surveillance footage and all that. They just wanted the visual of Seymour dying on a slot machine. It just logically, it just doesn't make sense. It's not satisfying.
Terrible.
Yeah.
And at least there's no like pun with like a slot machine death. Like, sometimes people like sort of take a narrative situation and be like, oh, well, slots, like if he had a slot addiction as a kid and it was like one of the reasons why they took him out of the crew, and then they used assumption to kill him. And that, it's a dumb joke, but at least it is a little something. It literally has no bearing at all to him as a person as to why that was the manner in which they killed him. And I think probably the worst section of the Sad Sack investigation this episode is where he poses as a mortuary, or goes to see the dead body, and his disguise is just a pair of glasses, like literally, and he just takes them off when he's alone in the room as the guy goes to check on something else for a minute or two. And he doesn't even lie his way through when he gets called out for being for not being an actual like, for instance, whatever his lie was to the guy there. So that was just kind of pathetic, and again, really not a scene that really means anything. It's one thing to investigate this, death of Seymour, but if we learn something about the cop as a character, then you can still have a little bit of purpose to those scenes. And literally, he just investigates, and there's no narrative depth to anything that he says or does.
Yeah, this mortuary scene is also terrible on a technical level. They've put this weird blue filter over it, which reminds me of the Saw movies, how they sometimes put a blue filter, and it just looks really bad. It's a very fake looking set that they have. Yeah, it's just very odd. I understand that he has to go and get information and get physical evidence, but also he doesn't really get any physical evidence. He just takes a bunch of photos of Seymour's body, which eventually the police just confiscate in this very strange scene toward the end of the episode. The cops just barge into his room and say, this is the exact line, "I'm seizing these photos in violation of the law." What law? What are you talking about? I understand it's a corrupt police thing, but in violation of the law? What?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And that came after probably one of the worst choreographed fight scenes in modern television history, where Sad Sack fights in a 2-1, 2 versus 1 fight in this poorly lit kitchen with like some. It's either a combination of bad editing or just obvious fake fake fighting. I mean, stage combat is its own situation. You can have the real actors fake punch, or you can have stunt doubles like do more realistic punches, and it just is one of the worst I've ever seen. I've ever seen shot on TV, and I've seen a lot of bad fight scenes over the years.
Yeah, it's one of those classic fight scenes where somebody's swinging to hit somebody else, and right before they connect, they cut, so it kind of conceals the blow. So it's really that, but you can really tell. I mean, in Marvel movies and things like that, when they do that, it still looks bad, but they have enough technical prowess they can kind of get away with it. This one, you can tell they're not actually connecting, and you just have. I'm not trying to body shame the guy that plays the cop or anything. He just doesn't seem to be in especially good shape. And to have him win on a 2-on-1 fight where he's just sort of throwing people into shelves in a kitchen in this dark room. And at the end of it, he gets his money stolen from him. He takes his money back and also robs the guy that beat him up. So again, you're supposed to be our hero, that you're stealing people's money. He goes, I'm taking my money back with interest. Very strange. And they don't even get the makeup right. He seems to have no cuts or bruises on his face. But then later on in the I'm seizing these photos in violation of the law scene, he does.
Yeah.
So I'm thinking that maybe they just had it dark to make it seem like he wasn't injured or something, to conceal the fact that he wasn't. Very strange.
Yeah, I mean, really, an episode that I think should have been focusing on Miami a bit more, really was more about Sad Sack than anybody else. And then, we've talked about how these episodes really have some weak endings. This episode ends with I wasn't like looking forward to this episode as more, but at least it kind of felt like, okay, we're building up to phase 1 of the master, or phase 2 of the master plan, actually getting into the game with the Matador, because the game that episode kind of ends as their cash game plan is kind of coming together. The trio and Matador are all going to be at the same table, and the plan is that they're going to, win big in this cash game, and that will, get even with Matador once and for all. And so I was kind of like looking forward. Okay, we're going to see. I obviously we're only halfway into the season, so it's going to blow up. But at least that can be fun, seeing how that will play out, because it's going to be more focused on poker action. And I thought, great, the very next scene of the first scene of the next episode is going to be the game, and then it's going to be a long thing, maybe a few cop scenes cut in between. But fine, it's going to be a great episode, and that does not happen.
Yeah, I mean, it's the best scene in the entire episode. They meet at a bowling alley, which is a little weird, and the bowling alley seems very dark. But at least, okay, it makes sense. Eddie's in with the Matador. He can set up this home game. Miami and Clark can come in and play. This makes sense. This is a plot beat that makes sense, even though it doesn't really make sense with the rest of the episode. But overall, there's potential here. We can move the story along. And of course, as an audience member, you're thinking, oh, I wonder if Clark's subplot is going to interfere with the game somehow. Are they going to have to get him, this is going to affect the plot somehow.
Not to mention, with the cop kind of being called out by the Vegas cop, that might sort of like temporarily freeze his attempts at investigating. He's going to have to double down. Maybe he'll be out for an episode or two, and then he'll come back with some extra buddies or some extra evidence that he obtains from the game, and then that will play out for the finale. So again, there's potential there for elevating things from an F level to maybe a D- D level. And episode 5, while to be fair, there are fewer useless scenes. The actual development in the plot and the pacing are arguably among the worst of the entire show.
Yeah, as we just mentioned, end of episode 4 is them cobbling together this plan to have a cash game, right? Makes pretty clear sense what episode 5 is going to be. One thing we didn't really talk about in episode 4 is there was a couple scenes with the casino executives, but they weren't a big focus, right? All of a sudden at the start of episode 5, they are. There's this guy from the Gaming Commission who wants access to their books and files. What? Where did this come from? Is this going to be an episode of, a situation of the week that they have to deal with? Why can't you just keep it flowing from the cash game conversation at the start of the previous episode?
I know. And so I was so surprised. I just kept waiting for scene after scene in episode 5. It's called Rivered. So let's get to the cash game, and it's almost as if they realized, oh, wait a minute, we want to show all this stuff too, but we don't know the chronology, so we're just gonna throw it in the first half of the episode, and then maybe no one will notice. But the actual poker game doesn't take place until the very end of episode 5, like the last third, basically, because we have more scenes with Sad Sack Cop, with Hawaiian Henry, Tropical Henry, and that awful pet store aquarium scene that I just can't believe was written on paper and then shot on film, because it just makes absolutely no sense why they're taking this whole exchange is taking place at a pet store.
So yeah, to set this scene up, we have Sad Sack, Grumpy Cat, whatever you want to call him, confronting Tropical Henry in this aquarium. Now, remember last time the cops confiscated Sad Sack's photos. So there's a cop in this aquarium for some reason, or a security guard or something. And as Sad Sack's trying to intimidate Henry with his bad Christian Bale Batman voice, the cop kind of walks by, and the sheriff sort of retreats, and Tropical Henry's like, oh, you don't want the cops to notice you? So what he does, he takes a fire extinguisher and throws it at one of the aquariums. And there's like slow motion and close-ups of this fire extinguisher flying and hitting this aquarium, and it shatters and water's flowing out. And then Tropical Henry just books it. And that's the end of the scene. I don't even understand. It's just so weird.
It's bad. It's bad. And again, this is all taking place on the heels of that cliffhanger of the cash game started. Like, leave no more Sad Sack. Just let us get to some poker action here. And no, we have to have Hawaiian Henry. It's basically the problem with Hawaiian Henry kind of being elevated to a prominent role in this episode is that he really has no character. We saw him in the pilot. Eddie charmed him with his poker skills, I guess, but we don't know why he's involved in poker, why he's involved in the Matador, why, what he has to lose if he snitches, or what he has to gain if he doesn't. There's just no sense of anything like that. So the fact that he ends up being kind of semi-arrested by Sad Sack, gets brought into the Las Vegas PD to sort of be a key witness, and then the major plot twist of, oh no, the cops were in on it the whole time, they're all part of the operation, which wins like $8,000 every couple of days. I mean, come on. And then we get just a really bizarre scene where Sad Sack gets arrested because he roughed up the guys in the kitchen fight scene, and he took some money off them, and he doesn't really it's supposed to be considered like a big betrayal by Henry, or not, and then no, not a betrayal, because now he's the Matador had gotten him to sort of have an idea of get Sad Sack into the cops department so that he can be arrested. Look at his split, and then his loyalty is rewarded with a gunshot by the chief officer, I guess, or the head of the Las Vegas PD, which absolutely makes no sense. That like this is going to be a full report, FBI investigation, a shooting inside the cop's office. How would they ever explain that? No amount of money can explain that.
Yeah, it doesn't make any sense. I mean, and also, again, technically it's not well presented. The scene's not well paced. You figure out, as the two of them are sitting there, that Sad Sack's going to get arrested and Henry's going to go away. So I mean, it is surprising that he gets shot, but again, doesn't make any sense. And also they present it slowed down, and it's one of those very dramatic Quentin Tarantino style things where he gets shot in the stomach here and blood just splatters everywhere. Like, it just goes everywhere on the back walls. They put in way too many squibs. But before that scene, there's this really awkward scene where Henry goes to the cash game guy, and they're out in these like next to these trash bins or something. I don't even know where this is supposed to be geographically. And it's one of those scenes where Henry's kind of like, yeah, the cop came up to me, but I kept my silence. I'm still good, right? And then they get into a fight, and it just looks really fake. Like they're throwing each other into trash bags. And the cash game guy pulls out a knife and tries to stab Henry. And it doesn't look like the actors are trying at all, or that they know what they're doing. And eventually some other casino employee shows up, so Henry gets away, and that's what leads him to
the small neck slice. And that's supposedly what like convinces him to like snitch. So it's supposed to make the betrayal seem more surprising. But again, this has nothing to do with our main trio. ultimately, and it also is just it's again horribly acted, and it's just not a very satisfying plot development because it basically ends up with this entire 5 episode long investigation by Sad Sack amounting to absolutely zero. And then he just gets bailed out literally by lowball instead afterwards. So it literally, the cop had no real footprint in the action because other people come in and swoop in to sort of take away any sort of like narrative momentum that he could have had in this, one-man show investigation.
Yeah, so it's as you said, it lowball bails him out of jail because over these last couple episodes, there's been this weird subplot that lowball is on the outs for some reason in this casino thing, and he gets fired in this episode for some reason. Again, I don't know why. I mean, lowball had been loyal to Madsen in the previous episode. Madsen kind of came up to him and was like, "Hey, you got to stick with me. You're one of us." Sort of like threatening him.
Lowball was trying to push Matador out.
Yeah,
so it's supposed to be a power dynamic, but then it would have been nice to have like a flashback of how their dynamic first began. Like seeing before and after. Give us mustache for Lowball, mustache for Matador. Oh hey, I'm Matador. Hey, I'm Lowball. Why don't we work together? Give us something, because otherwise it's just sort of petty politics between both those two guys and the other guy, the hot tub guy. Kind of, and again, there's just no real. And again, none of those scenes really tie into anything else. They're just kind of in its own pocket. So that they could have an excuse for Lowball to bail out the cop because he wants to get back at his former employers. Oh no! And again, this has nothing to do at all with the big cash game. Still, doesn't play into the mechanics of that scene at all. And again, while it's all happening, there's sort of an auditor of sorts investigating the casino, and he's really not falling for any bribes. Food, items, woman. He's just like, nope, I'm gonna investigate you. You cannot convince me. And then Matador gets the harebrained idea or read that he happens to be gay, so they bring in some young guy for him to play with, and that oh yep, we're good. I was a professional before, but now I'll be back next week. Give me some more of that guy, thank you. Like, it is just the most distasteful treatment of the LGBTQ community. Just having yeah, he'll drop everything at the sign of one 20-something-year-old guy, and it's just incredibly lazy too.
Yeah, and fun fact, that bellboy who the auditor comes onto was Green Arrow on the Arrow TV show. I IMDb'd it, so he's in the Arrowverse. He's been Batwoman, Supergirl, all that. So that was his first one of his first roles, which is very
again, you could have had some sort of interesting plot dynamic where his investigation spills into the cash game, where it's like, oh, Matador's playing, let me watch this game, and that you could have had, but instead that potential gets nipped in the bud with his bud. And unfortunately, again, it's just an example of this episode failing at taking these plot details, because we kind of knew from before that they're under investigation all the time anyway, so that was not technically out of nowhere. But again, these plot threads just lead to very unsatisfying directions as we're at the midway point of the show.
Yeah, and I mean, it's just so terribly presented too. They're watching this auditor on these security cameras, and there's a shot when a woman's trying to seduce the auditor, and it cuts to I can't remember who watching it on a surveillance camera, but from the angle of where it is, like, this camera is at an impossible angle. It's not on the woman's shoulder or on her dress or anything. It's like behind her and above her. So it's like, what? Like,
yeah.
Make any sense on a technical level. And then like when it shows that he's actually gay and is going to go have intercourse with the Green Arrow, I guess, it like cuts away as he like walks up to him, and they're all just standing in a bar like watching this on a computer or something, and they're like, oh my god, you were right again, Michael Madsen. It's just very why would you watch this in a crowded location? Why are you so visibly upset? It just doesn't add up.
And it was weird. It was like I said, they were stalling for time in a season where they only have 9 episodes, and there's so many different avenues we could have gone down plot wise of all those deleted scenes that we'll discuss later that could have been maybe functional in the show. And when the actual big game finally starts, we see absolutely zero of the action besides a quick montage of Clark and Miami winning until the very final hand. So there's really no inklings or clues or foreshadowing that Matador was in on the whole time or anything. So that when he finally comes forward and says, "You guys are cheating, I can tell. You can fold or go to jail." I mean, he was kind of supposedly all-knowing, conning them on their con, but so their plan fails, but it makes no sense how it fails because we literally only see the smallest snippet of where where everything kind of comes together supposedly in the game. And Eddie doesn't even try to really like back him up, and so his friends obviously think, "Oh, you betrayed us," but it's like, no. No, he didn't, and you didn't like give any sort of inkling, or if they're being that obvious when they were cheating, like that was your master plan. The guy you know is cheating, you're gonna cheat back, fine, but at least have a unique way that they can't percept because they, we see them winning 300,000 here, 300,000 there, so it doesn't make sense. Just
Yeah, I mean, there's this one scene earlier which is weird where Madsen brings Eddie to this apartment and essentially gives Eddie the apartment, and he gives this Madsen gives this long speech about fighting the fog and you have to fight the fog and whatever, and the camera's just following him as he's walking around, and when it cuts back to Eddie, he's just sort of like looking around like this, like there's no reason to cut back to him. So anyway, Madsen gives this big speech to him about fighting the fog, gives him the apartment. Then later on, there's the scene between Eddie and Madsen's daughter, and the daughter is upset or angry at Eddie about not moving into this apartment or something, and he didn't tell her. And again, isn't this relationship just supposed to be sexual? Like, what is your sense of boundaries here? And then
I mean, they kind of have like a breakup scene that isn't a breakup scene because they're supposedly not really a couple, but they're kind of supposed to be. Again, it's just the most confused way of presenting two individuals in a relationship when literally there's that whole scene where they're saying, "Oh, we have rules. We're the cliche like we're gonna hook up but not actually be together situation." So again, it just adds to a confused nature. And we don't really know how Eddie feels about her.
yeah.
And nor is there any scene of her by herself reflecting on anything. She doesn't get any scenes to herself besides with Matador or with Eddie. So again, she just exists in this weird, like it's as if the writers had, people will just fill in the blanks themselves. They'll just assume that that's what we're going for with the character, and it doesn't come across that way in the slightest.
Yeah, I mean, a romantic relationship is such a big subplot in so many television shows.
Mhm.
And the best relationships we see, again, build episode by episode, and it's very clear what each person brings to the relationship. And it's not just physical, but it's emotional and it's intellectual. The best relationships, we see the couple solving problems together, not just with problems with each other, but actually working together as a team to achieve a common goal. But here it's physical, I guess. But then what else is it? What are the emotions or anything being attached to it, especially after you've had this big scene that was 3 minutes long a couple episodes ago where you said, we're just going to be, you're not going to talk to me about problems, blah, blah, blah. It's just.
Yeah, I mean, you could have had a situation where Eddie was like romancing her to be in the Matador's good graces, and then you had Matador encouraging her that way. Eddie's more in line with his sort of circle. That's not present whatsoever. So there's really, we don't understand what's the point besides the physicality of everything, and so it doesn't work. And then obviously the master plan blows up in a very unsatisfying way. It'd be one thing if they just like lost a hand flat up, like they lost their money because they had aces against kings and they hit a king on the flop or something. That that's one way the plan could fail. But having Matador, why would Matador give the fighting the fog speech to Eddie if he thought, oh, he was in on it the whole time? And It's again also a big leap to assume that he was in on them as well. I mean, he ties it into the acting of the fight scene in episode 1. But even then, Eddie didn't slip up in his act at any point. There was no like little like verbal slip up or like, maybe he spotted him talking to Miami one time, when there was none of that. So it didn't feel like it was an organic revelation that Matador was in on the button the whole time.
Yeah, I mean, again, it's a montage of the game with no hands being shown. Clark's got an ace high flush. Madsen's got a king high flush. And then he's just, you two are working together. I know it the whole time. is there any little hint? Why would you teach him the hand signals that he can give to a cop and that would bust you? Why give him an apartment? Why spend any time? Why spend all that time with him in episode 3?
I mean, he gave him $300,000 for the game against the Whale, so
Yeah.
it's not like you didn't trust him then. And also the mechanics of the final hand there, where Eddie has the nut flush and Matador has the king high flush. I mean, it doesn't make sense for the hand to stop midway where Matador says, "Oh, you two who are cheating me," when Eddie's the one. Like the plan has to end with Eddie calling Matador's all in with the nut flush. So it doesn't make sense where the hand doesn't involve Eddie with that last sort of conversation that they have before Miami and Clark stand up and leave the table.
Yeah, it just doesn't it doesn't work on any level, and it's just absurd because you've been built. This is what they said in episode 1. We're going to go and beat Madsen at a cash game and take his money. This is everything you've built up. This is the climax of the storyline. In episode 5, we're only halfway through the season. I mean, even just the logic of putting this halfway through the season, what else is going to follow? How can you follow this thing that you've been building up for so long and now it's over? It doesn't make any sense on any narrative level, especially with the idea of, you can have Eddie being in the Matador circle and his sense of morality is being corrupted. And you can have scenes with the Matador and Eddie bonding. So at the end, when Matador discovers that he's been scammed, it lands a lot better. Like an analogous subline would be in Better Call Saul, when the character Nacho gets in the good graces of this guy, Lalo. And they spend an entire season. Nacho does all sorts of things with Lalo. He does things with his cousins, wins everybody's respect, and then Nacho betrays Lalo at the end. And you can just see in the acting how angry Lalo is, and it lands so much better because you've played this out over a season. Here, I mean, 5 episodes, and even then, like you cobble together these scenes, it's like, what, 20 minutes? I mean, I don't know. Very small amount of time.
It's bad, and even if the pilot might have been worse, because being a pilot is a whole different category of TV than just being middle of the season. But this episode, it just really bugged me with the way that the turns the plot was taking, and especially since you were already stalling for half the episode when you weren't following up with the cliffhanger from the episode prior. So it was just all around, it was painful. It was painful.
Yep, but that's not the end of the episode, because the end of the episode is that Madsen confronts Eddie in the apartment, which this apartment, by the way, has this like weird curtain that's hanging down, and it just seems very empty. There's a pinball machine in it for some reason. Mm-hmm. But anyway, Madsen's like, Eddie, I trusted you. I'm going to beat you up now. So he gets beaten up by Madsen and 2 guys. He's punched into a glass table and he falls onto the glass table, which again is in slow motion. And he's got very fake, clearly dried blood running down his face. But that's not where the scene ends.
No, it's not.
With the daughter of all people showing up and is essentially like, look at what you did. You ruined something good. You're stupid, and then leaves. So like, what is your relationship? Why?
I know. Are you, so do you feel betrayed, but you were just in it for the physicality of it, and you were kind of behind Daddy's back anyway. So it doesn't even make sense. Once again, it's just like a cliche scene where like someone says, "Oh, we could have had something special. You betrayed me," when really he didn't betray her. And Matador kind of just assumed he betrayed him and he acted as if, like at what point did Matador? There was no like one scene where Matador's like eye twinkles or he like is, pondering, is Eddie secretly against me? Like, so that again, that scene assumes that there was some sort of ABC sort of track line of that being a part of the character's mindset. It just wasn't there.
Yep. So, this cash game subplot is kind of sort of over, but don't worry, folks. Before the cash game, Clark gets a mysterious phone call from someone who's like, "What are you doing with my money, Clark?" And it's a sort of raspy voice over the phone, and Clark doesn't. So that subplot's still going. We have 4 episodes of material with Clark being extorted, kind of.
So episode 6, entitled Gentleman Jim. So, anytime you have a massive sort of climax to the plot, that's the best time to introduce like 5 more new characters into the fold. So naturally, that's where the plot goes next, because the particular Gentleman Jim is actually Eddie's dad, who Eddie discovers has stolen almost $10,000 from his mom, the money that he gave her earlier, that supposedly she owed him from the past. And Jim is played by an actor many might recognize from shows like Heroes or Breaking Bad or Better Call Saul. I call him Papa Petrelli because that was, him from Heroes season 3, which was before this season my worst television series of all time. So something about him attracts in the bad writing. But we also get a guest star from Saw 6, the essentially protagonist from Saw 6, Peter Outerbridge, and a just kind of, again, another useless role where he's kind of a character from Miami's past who's kind of like a half romance interest, but half not, much like her ex, much like Eddie, much like Clark. It's bad.
Yeah, I mean, so Gentleman Jim, yeah, it's Robert Forster, who was also in Jackie Brown, I think, and I think he was nominated for an Oscar for some movie. So, he's again one of the better actors in the show overall. He's in 2 episodes, so I guess you could say he has a recurring role. Very thin, but still.
Yes.
And he does fine. I mean, he has very little to work with. And, he's sort of an older man and he has that sort of authority and prestige about him. So, he does fine.
Yeah.
But yeah, he's Eddie's dad. We discover this in a very odd scene where he and Eddie play a hand and they chop it. And Eddie has been beaten up and he's been wearing sunglasses, right? He takes sunglasses, Dad, you stole that money, that sort of thing. And it's like, up till this point, the mom character appeared in one other scene beside the first episode where she has dinner with Eddie, and it's like a candlelit dinner, which is very strange between a mom and son, right?
Mm-hmm.
There's been no mention of his father. There's been no mention of daddy issues. Michael Madsen doesn't come off as a surrogate father figure. Nothing like that. It just comes out of nowhere. Mm-hmm. And it's like, why would you steal $10,000 from your wife or something?
Wife, whatever, yeah.
Very strange.
Yeah, it's very strange. And the actual hand where Eddie is just betting madness against his dad, they both have Jack Kai, so they chop the pot. And again, we aren't showing any hole cards during this hand, so it just comes across as we assume Eddie is just spewing chips to this guy, and somehow he has the exact same hand. Their kicker for their Jack does not play, so very bizarre. So again, not the one big poker hand of the episode, not very interesting really. And then we get perhaps the worst job interview in television history, where Clark, for some reason, he just he completely leaves town or leaves the state. We don't know where this job interview takes place. So that's another problem. Is like Clark didn't have as big a emotional investment in the big cash game. I mean, we have his subplot with his friend and all that stuff, but it doesn't relate to the game per se, because the money, we don't really know what the money meant to him because the details are so fuzzy. So he gets a job interview, even though he's got a criminal record, at like a brokership where it's like a sales sort of thing. And it literally is like the worst excuse for a job interview ever. It literally is like 2 minutes long. We see the whole thing. And apparently Clark has these magical salesman skills because he uses off screen, of course, we don't actually see how it works. And he's not really all that charismatic at the table. I mean, he's kind of like slide talking, sarcastic, all that stuff that Eddie and Miami are, but it doesn't really translate the sales per se. So it's kind of an implied skill off screen. And so again, this job interview scene, it has no tie to anything besides the fact that it's money for him. Right. So it's again part of the big problem of this piece has no place in this puzzle of the show.
Yeah, and we get another one of those Clark. The scene begins with Clark on the phone, and again, I mentioned last time he got a mysterious phone call. Another mysterious phone call, essentially just you owe me money, Clark. How are you going to pay me back? That sort of thing. And Clark hangs up and goes into this job interview. So again, the presentation is just really confusing. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's just so bizarre. And did Clark tell the other two that he's going to go get a job? Where is this supposed to take place? I'm assuming it's in Vegas, but what kind of company is this? Did he submit a resume? Does he have a cover letter? Anything like that? And again, as somebody who's done a lot of job interviews over the last couple of years, the shortest job interview I had was 30 minutes, 2 minutes. It's just crazy. Clark doesn't ask any questions to the guy about the company or how it works or anything like that. It's just very strange. And it's even stranger because they have a scene earlier in the previous episode where they go to Seymour's safety deposit box and it's full of money. So it's like, have you run out of money? Did you lose all the money to Madsen the previous time? What happened? What are you doing?
Yeah, I mean, not to mention, I mean, Madsen. We imagine you know, pocketed the money that Clark and Miami ponied up for the cash game, so he's up a good amount of money. So you know, it begs the question: how much money does Madsen really, or Maddo really have on hand? I mean, he's spending kind of lavishly on, I guess, on alcohol or women or whatever here and there, but you know, we don't know exactly like what, like, is he a millionaire? Is he a billionaire? He's not a billionaire, but we don't know where in the money, you know, the 1%, the 0.1%, whatever he's actually in. So it's kind of a plot hole later in the show when we try to get an idea of what money he needs to win to kind of reach certain, you know, buyout amount for a business deal. So again, this episode is trying to present like a parental story for Eddie, because he's talking to his dad after a long time. And again, it just doesn't come across as like the dad sort of was a bad role model. Like, there's no unique spin on it. It doesn't tie into poker really. And his dad's kind of like has a mistress that's like half his age, pretty much maybe a little bit older than Eddie, but not much older, or maybe the same age or whatever. It's just kind of awkward. And again, imagine if you would swap the roles. Unrealistic, right, perhaps, but imagine you had the mom be the bad parent, and the dad being the figure. Maybe Matador, and then you could kind of have two different dad stories in there with Matador. That could have been something, but it's just a very cliche approach to this angle of Eddie's past.
Yeah, and there's a very awkward scene where Eddie is talking to his mom as she's working in a kitchen or something, bringing dishes, waitress, I'm not sure what. And they're walking through this very long set. I mean, it goes on for 3 minutes. They're just walking. And it's, again, where is this? What, I understand casinos are very big and some of them have restaurants, but still, it just comes off as way too big and expansive. And there's very tight hallways that they're walking through too. It's kind of like the scene in the first episode where the Matador talks to Lowball in the kitchen. It's just very strange. I think they just wanted interesting visuals. I don't know. And then there's a scene where Eddie goes to confront his dad, and the dad's mistress comes on to Eddie and starts trying to have sex with him. And it's like, why? What is going on here?
How does that serve Jim's purpose? How does that serve her? I mean, again, women are just, besides Miami, they're just used as sex symbols in the show, or sex or something like that. They're focused on their bodies and not their, you know, their agency in the story. And yeah, and even Paulie, even just as guilty of that sin in the show is Sad Sack's wife. She actually stops by because earlier he had called her to sell some items to free up some cash for his investigation. And she has every right to be upset because, again, he's putting his life on the line, his family's on the line, money's on the line, you know, a lot's on the line, all for some, you know, petty brotherly revenge. And she didn't even like his brother, so she doesn't really have much of a motivation to help him. And despite this, they still hug, they still kiss, they still, you know, hook up in his hotel room. And again, it kind of ruins the whole point of making the cops sort of quest become this like selfish journey for himself, because if his wife's kind of supporting him at the same time, and it doesn't really make sense. If she's got kids back home, she got like a babysitter or something, or sister watch them, I don't know, we have no idea.
Yeah, again, completely unhelped by how bad Chris Bauer acts. There's a moment where the cop's wife says, I sold your guns, I sold the Winchester and the D3, and then it cuts to Chris Bauer and he goes, Angela, not my D3. Exactly like that. There's just no emotion or anything. And then Lowball shows up at the hotel and is like, hey, we got to go, because they have this alliance now. There's a scene earlier where they meet in a hotel, and Lowball's like, I can give you some names. We'll get the media involved. We'll be, getting Everest from all sides. And at one point, the cop says, at least I won't be fighting by myself anymore. Again, just can't sell the lines for anything. Just so bad. Yeah.
And so Eddie's mom, she, hooked up with the dad. So that was presumably kind of why she gave him the money. And then she defends Jim when Eddie accuses him of being a slime ball until he reveals that he's got another mistress that's like Eddie's age. He's like, oh my god, like, but you really expect him to all of a sudden just be faithful to you all of a sudden? Like, oh hey, he swings into town and then he's gonna like rekindle your long lost love and be like, monogamous with you? Like, where did that come from? That didn't ring true at all.
Yeah, it's just this whole subplot is, again, just very weird that they're going to throw this into this episode. It's very weird that they're not following up with Eddie almost dying. I mean, he goes to this diner where Miami and Clark are and takes off his sunglasses to show he's gotten beaten up. Okay, so I guess their relationship, whatever it was beforehand, is, they're back together. They don't hate each other anymore. But it's just, there's no build up. There's no sense of flow or continuity or anything like that. And it just, the continuity that is there is, there's so many scenes with Clark that, I mean, there's a scene where he's in the garage presumably after his first day, and he's like looking around, he hears the screech of tires, and he thinks he's being chased, and he runs into the guy who gives him the interview, and he's like, hey, how was your first day? And Clark's like, I gotta go. And he goes to his car, and he's like sitting in his car all nervous, and you're expecting something to happen, but then nothing happens. And then later there's a scene of him going to his desk, and there's like a broken casino chip on his desk, as if like, ooh, there's eyes on him. And then the boss comes up to him and says, hey, your background check shows that you're a criminal. Don't you do background checks before you hire the person? That way you don't hire criminals.
And then if the only reason why you're not going to fire him is because he's really good at selling, we need to see that, because otherwise we're just assuming, like, it doesn't make sense for us as the audience to really buy into that plot points if we don't have any, proof of that being the case. Like, I think he's got like one phone call in the next episode when he gets fired, where he's like about to make a sale, but we don't see anything before that. So it doesn't ring true with the slightest either. Yeah.
And I mean, this episode really doesn't move the story along beside having Clark get this job. And then there's one scene where the guy who had his arm broken, who was put on a bus, they just cut to him for whatever reason in the middle of the episode, this brief scene of him walking. And then he's all of a sudden with Sad Sack, and it says, hey, I can get you some people to bring the Matador down. So he connects Eddie to the cop, and Eddie's like, hey, can you give me the tape of the cash game that I just did? And the cop's like, I'm not going to give you the tape if you don't agree to help me. So of course he agrees to help him. And that's the only substantial scene in this episode. Just so many strange scenes. There's a scene where Madsen gets angry at his daughter for sleeping with Eddie. And it's also Madsen's worst acting in the entire show. I thought he was drunk at first. And then I realized, oh wait, he's actually supposed to be angry. It doesn't land at all. It just comes out of nowhere. It's very strange.
Not to mention, I mean, this episode does begin to put into place what the Matador's plans is for the main event equivalent of the World Poker Championship. He's going to have 30 horses in the race that will chip dump to him. He'll pay up their buy-in, and if he does, so far, he'll pay him an extra couple bucks here. So that kind of sets the narrative for what the mechanics of the tournament will be, sort of. And then with the leverage of the videotape, the trio will actually be able to get back in, because their supposed reason for staying away was they could turn in that tape to the cops at the casino, and then they would get arrested. So with that tape gone, it's impossible for that evidence to be used, which is pretty flimsy because there were eyewitnesses and stuff. So I don't know how that would work. And so here we come to episode 7. And again, after watching 6 episodes of absolute garbage, I actually appreciated this episode for 2 reasons. One is, before we sat down and watched this episode, I had set forth a few goals. I wanted to know how big the tournament was going to be, what the prize was. I wanted to see an actual team, like a proper team meeting where they sit down and discuss, we're going to do A, B, and C to beat the Matador. And also what the buy-in of the tournament was, if there's going to be $10,000, much like the main event. So so that was the first goal, was those little mini plot points. Those were all checked off. And 2, we actually have a somewhat realistic-ish, authentic-y representation of a classic main event in the episode, with Lon, with Norm, with Poker Pros, and that was pretty cool to see.
Yeah, in the next time episode, at episode 6, we were usually skipping over them, but the very first shot was Lon and Norm standing in front of a green screen, exactly like the 04-05 main event with the World Series of Poker behind them. And so Ben and I both got excited. Mm-hmm. And yeah, I mean, this is the single best part of this entire show, is just how they present it. It's not perfect, but their commentary, Lon and Norm's commentary, is very reminiscent of their actual banter. the editing style, like the graphics and stuff, are very, not again perfect, but very similar to the ones that they actually use in the main event. And on a technical level, I mean, the big thing I noticed was, again, they put this terrible camera filter over so much of the footage in the casino during the show, and they keep that filter during what's supposed to be the main event coverage, and it just looks very bad. It's not reminiscent of the actual cinematography within the main event as it is. But yeah, I mean, it's also just how they cut to it throughout the episode is very bad. Well, again, we'll get into that. But yeah, I mean, it's at least it's a break of pace. It's something. It's good.
I know. I can imagine if they had just done the whole season had this in there, every episode, you know, day 1, day 2, day 3. That could have been really cool. And it'll be something, a fictionalized version of the main event that's very unique. For this podcast in particular, it's hitting a lot of funny bones there.
Right.
We almost totally forgot, though, probably, again, Exhibit D in the worst character of the show museum is Madison's daughter offers a threesome to Eddie after everything, after this atrocious plotting of this relationship. She has a friend with her, and they have this big threesome, and then they have some more of that sort of cliche relationship talk the morning after at the top of this next episode.
It's just terrible. Yeah, I mean, you've said it. It's just terrible.
Yes. This comes before the Matador even knows that Eddie's playing in the main event. So it's not like he told her to do that so that he could control him later or trick him later, which they would try to do. The first scene of episode 7, Shuffle Up and Deal, tries to have this big meeting of these two big minds. Jim is hired by Matador to be one of his horses, and the plan is to give chips off camera. First of all, that would never happen in real life. Like, you can't covertly take chips off the table and then someone sits down and no one notices or notices that A, you're missing chips, or B, he's not gaining chips. That would just never work in real life.
Yeah, I mean, they check the hands after, check the chips after breaks, you bag at the end of the day. When I heard this plan about horses, I was figuring, okay, there'll be a situation where the horse will go all in and Madsen will call them and win his chips that way. That makes sense. This doesn't make any sense. It's just, I mean, yeah, it's just, the mind boggles about it. There's so many cameras, not just the security cameras for the casino, but also the ESPN cameras, right? I mean, it's very, and you also have to, for this plan to work, you have to go up to Madsen and shake his hand, slip it to him in a book or something. How many times can you do that? And you can't hand over a stack of chips. It can only be 1 or 2 chips at a time. It's a terrible plan. It's just practically, it doesn't work.
And it's acted as if it's like a truly effective, viable plan. So it's not even like it blows up for somebody, which is a shame. So at the top of the episode also, Matador is actually given a reason why he has to win this thing, because he's being pushed out of the casino. He needs to come up with $10 million to buy a ownership stake in the casino, and he doesn't have, his net worth is maybe like half that. So winning the first prize, which is $5 million, again, one of my goals for the episode, which was to name the top prize, would get him to that amount. And again, it begs the question: if he doesn't have that much money on hand, how, is he just always relying on, is he living paycheck to paycheck basically with all these people he's got to pay off all the time? It doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, I mean, he's got the police, he's got these connections to the casino, he's got all this stuff. He lives in a nice house. He's got cars and stuff. Why don't you just sell those? Why don't you stop giving your daughter money to go play blackjack or something? There's a lot of ways you could cobble this together. Write a book, do something else besides just cheat on a poker tournament. Offer classes. Doesn't make any sense.
And so again, this is all taking place before the poker action begins. Right. We also have a true grand team meeting. They all sit down. They know what they're playing for. The Matador's got horses. We're going to just have to weed them out and outplay them. They have an edge. We have to use our skill to be our edge. Again, a brief scene, nothing grand, but it's good when that's the narrative of the last 2 episodes is this tournament. It's good to at least have a clear team dynamic, which was absent in the first 2/3 of the show, where they never were in the same room ever together discussing just how to play poker together. And so that was good to have. And but then it ties into, again, leading up from the Clark stuff with his job and his friend. We have the most just ridiculous tangent where he goes to visit his friend's office and supposedly is like making eyes with the secretary, who happens to also be the only non-white woman in the cast. And of course, Clark being black, of course, it's just pretty cliche in that respect. And at least the ridiculous flirtation that she presents at least gets explained, I guess, in the next scene. But it is again just so transparent and shallow of writing.
Yeah, so Clark goes to this office to meet with Hayden Christensen to just, talk about their conflict or whatever. And yeah, I mean, the conversation is just Clark going, I don't want to do this. And Hayden Christensen's like, you got to. It's also terribly shot and lit. There's this glare coming in from the window, and it really hurts your eyes.
It really does.
There's these weird close-ups on both actors, and you're wondering why they're doing it. And then there's this very strange edit as Clark is leaving the room. It makes like the blinds or something kind of glitter as he's walking out. It's very strange. I just don't get. I understand they want it to be dark and ominous, but it doesn't. I can't see anything.
And then, of course, after we have a very transparent utility of a woman in the cast, we have another obligatory like stripper, hooker, bar scene type thing where Lowball brings in Sad Sack. And just that entire scene, I felt like it damaged those two characters more than anything else, because again, we're supposed to believe that they're working together for this investigation into the Matador, and you're going to go on this bizarre tangent with women, and like Lowball's trying to get Sad Sack to cheat on his wife basically for no reason while they're waiting for Skip to show up, and it just makes absolutely no sense why they would do that.
Yeah, I mean, there is a very, very long scene where this stripper is trying to seduce Sad Sack, and I mean, it just keeps going for a minute plus. It's just going. He shows off his wedding ring, clearly shows he's not interested. He's looking away from her, all of that. It's just very creepy. I mean, with Lowball, it makes sense because he's supposed to be kind of a sleazy guy, but it just doesn't. It's not interesting to watch. It's a little creepy how aggressive she's being toward him. Just all sorts of stuff. I mean, it just doesn't make any sense.
I mean, the whole point of that sequence is to end with them trying to pressure Skip into flipping.
Right.
But really, I mean, you could have done that in any other way. You could have had him, eating breakfast at the cafe. You could have had him catch him in his house. You didn't have to film that scene in that setting, unless you were setting up something later, which they kind of are. But even then, that's also probably distasteful. So it was just absolutely pointless.
Yeah, just to clarify, I keep saying the cash game guy. That guy's actually Skip. I just kept forgetting what his name was. So.
Skipped over in memory banks what his name was. But luckily, after, again, absolutely dreadful content in the first third episode, we actually get the introduction that is, feels kind of like the main event in 04. Again, this was filmed after Raymer won $5 million, so that's why they kind of had the $5 million number for the top prize here. We have the 36th annual World Poker Championship with a featured table with Erik Seidel. Lon and Norm introduced a number of players as if they would in an old school episode. We get the graphics of table one with coverage of the other tables outside. We get an interview of this guy Charles Heidman, who's supposed to be kind of like a cliche, like awkward internet only player now playing live, trying to multi-table in a little interview segment, which that part didn't look quite right, but the rest of the production definitely a bit more accurate to how an episode might actually look. And so just seeing a hand between Eddie and this guy Heidman, which is establishing, I guess, Eddie's live tell reading skills, and also how he could believably survive day one if you won a big pot off of somebody else. So that was, again, those are pretty good novelty factor there of that kind of action.
Yeah, so I mean, it's the one real poker hand in this. We see an earlier hand with this guy Heidman up against this guy Buckram, who's supposed to be this, or old hand at the game, and Heidman beats Buckram. But yeah, I mean, the action, I guess, kind of makes sense. Heidman has Queen 9, Eddie has King Queen. Heidman raises pre-flop. Eddie also calls it. So does Erik Seidel, by the way. He also calls. Yeah. And, the flop gives Eddie 2-pair, but Heidman also has mid-pair. And, it kind of plays out somewhat naturally. Granted, we don't really hear, sometimes we hear the bet sizes, sometimes we don't. Mm-hmm. We're not quite sure what the stack sizes are, what the blind structure is, or anything like that. But all right, okay, it's, mid-pair versus top 2, that kind of thing can play out. So ever so slightly realistic, I suppose. I mean, he does shove, which I don't know,
Well, he turns 2-pair.
Yeah.
And then, but it's a 3 diamond board, and I
Yeah.
don't know. I did kind of like it's kind of cliche, but then when Heidemann ends up losing, he kind of yells at the amateur, "Oh, this amateur, this table," kind of like you might hear a line similar to that in real life when someone gets angry and busts. Eddie uses the tale of ghost fingers as if he was on the computer, which is a little ridiculous, but
Very.
whatever. And so this episode also covers day 2 of the tournament after day 1 shows that table 1 action with Eddie, Hyman, and Seidel, where we see Clark versus one of the horses, where of course we have a king high flush against an ace high flush. As always, that's the only way that Clark can ever win a hand is if he has the nuts against the second nuts. But we get some more table 1 action, and again, like Eddie kind of looks like the kind of guy from '04, like a John Murphy or
Right.
someone. So that kind of lends a bit extra level of authenticity to the action. And the name Eddie Town, it kind of rolls off the tongue okay. I do think, was this the first time we ever saw his last name in the show? Like I feel like we never heard it in the first 2/3 of the show, so it was kind of weird to hear it be Eddie Town, because they showed the last name on the graphics, not the first name. So it was like a little weird.
Yeah, I don't know. Yeah.
But then when when Jim joins the table, it really did kind of remind me of '04 main event when like Brunson was playing against Scott Fishman. I don't know, just kind of the old three against the young three. It really kind of elevated things, even though it was a ridiculous hand to begin with. But I kind of liked how it felt as a viewer.
I don't know. I think that's stretching it.
Well, again, as somebody who was a nostalgia junkie for that main event like '04 back in the day, I kind of appreciated that. And again, Robert Forster definitely kind of looks like an older poker player at the table. Like he has a nice suit. It kind of felt like we see some older players wear suits like Marcel Lusk. So I don't know. I'm kind of merging a few images together into one table, but that's what I'm getting at. It felt like the serotonin in my brain was like deja vu in a similar-ish way.
The reason why I can't quite agree with you is just what the hand itself is in the context. So at the end of the day, they won. Eddie spots his dad hand off chips to Madsen, and dad just kind of like shrugs his shoulders and makes eye contact, which was kind of funny. But anyway, later on, they're at like a breakfast table or something, and there's like donuts. And they both sort of like reach for the last donut, and the dad's like, I always want to give you the last donut. You can have it, son. And Eddie's like, I know Madsen beat me up. You're a bad guy for doing this. So it cuts to this hand. Well, I should say Eddie's at the table, and then the dad comes over. He's like, oh, what surprise. We're both at this hand. And then he looks down at his cards and goes, I raised. He has queen jack. Eddie has pocket fives. And then the flop comes out to give Eddie a set. And it's the dad.
5 deuce deuce.
Yeah, full house, excuse me. So the dad just kind of looks over like, I know that face, like I know my own, gives this big speech and shoves all in. And Eddie calls, and sure enough, the turn bricks out. So the dad busts. So clearly, like it's him punting off his chips, but it's the first hand as soon as you two meet on a televised table with all these people, including Michael Madsen. Cuts to Michael Madsen watching. It's such a conspicuous, bad way of doing it. And also, it's a terrible spot to go all in because Eddie could be folding ace high. He could be folding pocket two, pocket threes, things like that. Like he's going to be folding so many hands. Obviously, with pocket fives, he's going to call, but it just doesn't make any sense.
No, what I was saying is that image, like if you had like a slideshow of still images from this episode, that's like just an image of him at the table across from Eddie. That was good. If you didn't have no video, like in 2D. And with just the image of it looked good, but the actual opposite of the hand is Travis is absolutely gross. It would never happen in real life. Even if you're tipped up, he has to know that he's going to call, and then it has to hold up still. He could have had like 2 sevens, and it could have come queen on the river, and it wouldn't have mattered.
Right.
So no, I agree that hand was terrible. And it's so on the nose. Like if you could have had maybe cut out some of the riffraff in the first third episode, had this take place a little bit after maybe another hand or two of Eddie and the dad at the table, like, and they were having like genuine hands of each other, and then he decides at the end, he looks towards Matador, and then he kind of comes to realization. It would have been cliche, but it would have at least been a bit more substantial to it. It's just so limited. Again, with all these other subplots in the way, like the best elements of the show can't literally have the time to shine through. And again, the best is all relatively speaking, but it's pretty bad. But nonetheless, again, just the image of this fake main event was worth a point or two in my books. Unfortunately, a lot of that goodwill was almost destroyed by this awful dominatrix scene with Lowball at the end, where Skip like hires the hookers at this online like sex club to like try to kill Lowball, and Sad Sack just barely saves him in time. Like, why wouldn't you didn't have to have the dominatrix like tie him up and then like have someone strangle him. You could have just had him like under the assumption he's going to be, you know, pleasured, and then have someone come in and try to kill him. It just, again, it's the objectification of women in this show, and again, it just gets worse and worse as the show goes on.
Yeah, so Lowball, you know, goes and pays for a dominatrix. The dominatrix handcuffs him to this thing, and it was Skip that tries to kill him for some reason. But you know, Lowball is such a brilliant mastermind detective that he manages to figure out that Lowball's about to be strangled. So Sad Sack runs, fights Skip again. It's a terrible fight scene, doesn't look real, and not only manages to get Skip to confess that he tried to kill Lowball, but also that he was involved in killing his brother, that he left him to bleed to death in the desert sun. So Lowball, not Lowball, Sad Sack, being the badass that he is, he's like, tell the Matador to come get me, and let Skip go. And then to end this episode on a funny little note, the cop goes up to Lowball. It's like, where's the keys? You know, where do we get the keys out of here? He goes, we'll just call a locksmith. He's like, you sure? Really? It's midnight. It's like, they get calls like this all the time. We're in Vegas. Roll credits.
I mean, it's one of the few like flat out attempts at humor, I guess, in this entire show, and it's just not funny in the slightest, and it's not helped by Chris Brewer's just awful delivery to begin with, too.
Okay. Yeah, but Ben, you called this the worst scene in the episode. I don't know if it is, because I think
I didn't call it the worst scene in the episode. I called it. I said, well, I mean, it a lot of the goodwill of the fake poker action, fake broadcast action, but it was bad. It was really bad.
Yeah, but you know, for me, just again, this continuation of this Clark thing. So the receptionist he flirts with eventually shows up on the rail, and they go and have like a drink together. And the receptionist mentions, "Oh, I quit my job. I was delivering packages to suspicious people." And she pulls out her badge to reveal she's an FBI agent the whole time.
Oh no! So,
yeah, so now Clark has to go and wear a wire to, you know, get Hayden Christensen. So it's just this very odd scene where it shows that he's been fitted with this like wireless wire thing. So in other words, they're not listening into it live. So he walks into the office, and Hayden Christensen's like, what do you want to talk with me about? And Clark writes a note to him saying, you know, I have a wire, be aware. And Hayden Christensen writes back a note saying, I don't believe you. I don't know why. It's just kind of strange. And then Clark says, your assistant's FBI. And then Hayden Christensen looks kind of bummed out. And then Clark goes, we're even, and walks out. Yes. Again, this is all communicated through notes. They're actual verbal conversations like, what do you want to talk with me about? You know, what we usually talk about. I'm not going to have this conversation with you. Like very thin with these long pauses. Like you can tell they're exchanging notes with each other if you were listening into the conversation. And then the receptionist rather, is shown coming back to work, and the office has been cleared out.
Yes.
It's so badly done. It's so badly executed. What was his process for hiring her to be his assistant? Like, where did this come from?
Now, what happened in job interviews, which is not in Vegas, don't exist, I guess. And not to mention, I mean, the note passing kind of reminded me of Death Note when in the later half of that show. It's kind of amusing until it didn't. You know, the pauses were totally inorganic on the conversation, so it was pretty obvious. You gotta make it seem believable that you're hiding your true conversation from the wire, but it's bad. But again, just by virtue of the fake featured table and stuff, I kind of give this the number one ranking of the first 7 episodes. And to my surprise, you know, we had talked about looking at the writers of each episode, and we noticed that the writing for the last 3 episodes, none of them wrote for the first 6. So we thought, you know, there's hope for maybe a rebound of quality, right? Even sarcastically. And to my surprise, episode 8 actually jumps up the ladder to be my favorite episode of this entire season, thanks to the best guest star in the show, my favorite poker player in the world, Mr. Phil Hellmuth.
Yeah, I mean, they actually do a good job bringing Phil into it. They mentioned that they've battled before, and there's even a little montage very similar to classic series main event of Phil, you know, seen winning hands against the Matador, including at a previous World Poker main event thing. And he actually does a good job selling his lines. And it like if I took these clips and I put it in a montage of Phil Hellmuth and I asked him to identify which one was fake, you probably look at Michael Madsen and say that it's fake. But just the way he talks and the way he acts, it really does feel very realistic. It's the best acting in the entire show by far. It's legitimately good acting.
It is, and acting is defined by how, if you can tell it's acting, it's not good acting, or if it's really, really poor acting to begin with, it's bad acting. But again, Hellmuth is great in this episode, and he's also in it for a pretty substantial portion. Like he's actually at the feature table of Matador, and there's a narrative behind their table dynamic for a good chunk of this episode. The problem is, whenever it cuts away from that table, it's absolute garbage. But when it's at the table, it's actually pretty entertaining. Unfortunately, so we mentioned how the Clark FBI secretary note passing scene takes place before the championship starts. But then the opening scene, even after we've seen Clark play poker for day 2 against one of the horses, the opening scene is him getting fired at his real job. And so, again, what is the timeline on this? Did it take place before the episode, after the episode? When? When did this happen?
Yeah, I mean, the main event takes place in the afternoon, I guess. So maybe he's doing this in the morning, but why? It's just very confusing. And yeah, the scene itself is really bad. Like the boss barges in and is like, the FBI called and you're a bad guy. I risked my career on you. This is what I get for being liberal. And so Clark goes, oh, you only hired me because I'm black? And the boss is actually shown nodding his head. So I guess all that stuff about being a great salesman was BS. Doesn't make any sense.
And the FBI got him fired. So again, an FBI agent acting out of spite, unprofessional, and she admits to acting out of spite. And so it just makes no sense. And so Clark kind of gets the FBI to join in on the master team here as this sort of group conspiracy against the Matador is starting to take place. During the next scene, though, Matador's daughter tries to suggest to Eddie, why don't we just run away? Let's run away together. Like, again, what is her character's like goal here? Is she worried for her father? Does she care about Eddie? Is she out for herself? Like, there's no direction for which way she's going. She's offering threesome. She doesn't want a relationship. She wants to be her dad's little girl. But what does she want? That makes no sense.
I mean, my theory is that what she's intended to be is that Madsen told her to go and be with Eddie, but then she got her real emotions involved with Eddie, is what I think that's what makes the most sense through these scenes. But still, what do you see in Eddie that you like? What rapport do you have with him? We never see them go out on a date or something. I don't get it.
I don't either. And she knows that her father hates him.
Yeah.
Eddie doesn't like him, obviously. So, and again, even if she's acting, it's never made clear what her purpose is with every conversation that she has with Eddie. There's no clarity at all.
Yeah, I mean, it's very bad. And also how it's presented too. It's Eddie's walking into this casino and then it sort of crossfades out to Eddie and Madsen's daughter. It looks very bad.
Mm-hmm. And so we also get another like grand team meeting where they're trying to analyze the situation, how many players are left, how many horses are probably left, what they're going to do. They know that Matador is going to be at the featured table, and so he's literally kind of in the spotlight, so we can't receive chips from people off the table because his stack kind of stays there, and there's an active count usually of how many chips they have. So he has to kind of play it straight. And luckily, on table 1, again, Phil Hellmuth, who has a fictional rivalry with Matador, with the flashback that you mentioned from 2001 bracelet win for Hellmuth. So that was a kind of cool little fake flashback scene there. And Hellmuth gets into his usual table talk that he was known for in the mid 2000s. And again, both Matador and Hellmuth at this point have a lot of chips. They're both basically like number 1, number 2, and the chip count with like 100 players left. So that, again, that's pretty cool. And they play a hand, and I was so worried that Matador was going to just bust him in the first hand they play together and then it'd be over. But luckily, they let it play a little bit longer than that, as they have Matador and Hellmuth square off, where Hellmuth pulls off a pretty ridiculous bluff. Like he shoves like 20x pot with Jack high, but gets a fold. And Hellmuth kind of rubs it in his face after he does it. But it was just pretty awesome to see that, even if it's a fictional win, because Hellmuth doesn't win very often in the classic main events anyway. So it's just kind of sweet to see that happen in a fictional world.
Yeah, it's honestly, it might just be the best moment of the whole show. I mean, it's satisfying, even though again the action doesn't make any sense. But you know what? Hellmuth is funny, so Hellmuth works.
And then so they cut to the outer table as they would in an old school main event, and they show Miami getting a lot of attention, which again that was pretty much how they would treat women in the edit back then. Oh, we have this lovely lady in the field with a lot of chips, and she's trying to make a name for herself. And again, that's pretty authentic too. So again, that's all pretty good. It felt a bit more organic and realistic than the last episode's coverage did, and that also things too.
Yeah, and they mentioned that Miami doesn't give her last name for some reason, which I think is weird.
And also, probably illegal. Like you have to enter the tournament. You have to give them your ID and show your last name and your first name and your social, or if you're a citizen or I don't know, whatever. You got there's all process there, so you can't just be, oh, I'm Miami on the slip. Wouldn't work that way in real life.
Exactly.
And so the main other stuff here is the FBI getting involved with the investigation against Matador, and also Matador trying to control Skip, who he knows was tapped by Lowball and Sad Sack in the last episode. So he's kind of reassuring Skip that you're okay, you're in my corner, I'm going to take care of you. And so he sends Skip away on vacation to Tahoe.
Lake Tahoe, yep.
Lake Tahoe. Which again, when we were watching this, we assume he's going to get killed because everyone in his crew gets killed at some point. But it's clearly shown as if we aren't supposed to believe that quite yet, even though I could tell it was coming later on.
Yeah, again, the way it's shot, like Madsen is in his hotel room or something with a golf club. He's practicing chip shots or whatever, and he's holding the golf club over his shoulder like this, and it's shot again very dark and ominous, trying to set this up. It's clear that he's going to kill Skip. I mean, come on, you don't have him holding a golf club over his shoulder, clearly trying to be intimidating and aggressive if you don't set that up.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Very strange. And then the other event of the episode really is kind of the following up on sort of Seymour. We probably almost forgotten about. We meet this priest who knew Seymour from years prior, and it's almost as if they had to justify Seymour being in the show, the actor who plays Seymour. So they had to throw in one more like flashback scene to get him in another episode. And again, it doesn't really tell us anything all that important about Seymour. It's just really kind of an odd tangent that the investigation stuff takes us to.
Yeah, I don't even like some guy named Daniel Kehoe or something. Like I have this written in my notes. Daniel Kehoe died, but he's not dead. Question mark, question mark, question mark. This has nothing to do with anything. You'd think, okay, if the priest knew about the brother that got killed or something else that's been mentioned before, but this just comes out of nowhere. Mm-hmm. That apparently Miami and the FBI woman go to this church because of something like a prayer card or something in Seymour's safety deposit box. Right. I don't recall seeing this if it was in there in that episode. And also, this church looks terrible, by the way. It does not look like a real building. They have a couple of extras sitting in chairs kind of going like this as though they're praying. But there's just a crucifix on a wall, and that's about it. No one's holding any Bibles or anything. It's just really bad.
And then on the task of flip-flopping here, Lowball tells Sad Sack after he almost got killed he wants out. And so he goes back to his old side and says, if you take me down, I have a dead man switch in the form of my testimony. Which begs the question, why did he even bother in the first place, leaving sides if he was just going to flip back? I mean, it didn't feel like it was, his character, we don't know anything about his character personally, only how he contributes to the cops' investigation. So again, it just, he's on the front box of the DVD. So he's, part of the main cast, but there's no arc of his character. We don't know anything more about him in episode 8 than we did in episode 1.
Yeah, I mean, I'm assuming he's just self-interested. But if you're self-interested, why partner with the cop? Why do all this? And again, this is just another scene that just comes out of nowhere. There's so many scenes set in this hot tub with this one casino executive who's just swimming around. And then Lowball will just appear there in his nice suit. And it's, again, super dark, and the only lighting is the lights underneath. Mm-hmm. So the waves are making lights against the walls, which, again, they probably wanted as a visual. But again, it's too dark to see. You don't understand what's going on. It's so bad.
It's bad. And again, it just, we have to reiterate that these characters really have just no depth to them. They're so one note in every respect. And you know, I feel like Miami had potential of being a well-rounded character. You could have had this Seymour priest flashback thing tie into something related to her relationship with him, and it just kind of comes and goes whenever they feel like, oh, we'll throw this in there at random. No big deal.
Yeah, but I mean, the daughter does get a lot of development because she finds out that Madsen is in bed with this Russian hooker person, and they have a conversation. So we know that she knows about Madsen with Russian hookers.
Again, it just speaks to what is this dynamic of this like love triangle of Matador, his daughter, and Eddie. Like, what is the point? What is the purpose? It is just so confusing and not in a good way. I mean, you can have a confusing, like ambiguous, layered dynamic, and that's not present at all.
So bad. It's just so
bad. You know, we get a bit more poker action where Matador knocks out the guy from episode 1 that Eddie had beat in that boxing ring poker game, and then reascends the chip lead, so that way he has more chips than Hellmuth for when they square down again. And again, it takes place in this ridiculous, like extreme, like they had to, like you feel like Hellmuth had to provide an input into, I would never go broke in this spot unless we had the exact same cards and the exact same run out like this as they do. In this hand, Hellmuth has trip kings with a 10 kicker with a flush draw, when Matador has 3 kings with jack kicker. So he has got chop outs, he's got winning outs, and Hellmuth, well, I guess, you know, end up busting. I mean, he gives the great line, I just lost the freaking crime lord. Like, that was a very like Hellmuth-ish ism that I loved. And even though I was sad to see Hellmuth bust out in this tournament, it was still, you know, it was, again, a really cool thing to happen in the show like that.
Yeah, it's the best line in the whole show because, again, it does feel like something Hellmuth would say. Though, again, it begs the question, I mean, when a gambler has cheating accusations made against them, that stays on them, right? I mean, Russ Hamilton is known as disgraced. When he's referred to by Norman Lawn on WSOP broadcasts, he's called the disgraced Russ Hamilton and all that. I mean, if Hellmuth knows that Madsen has these crime connections, and they mentioned a couple other times, they mentioned that Phil Ivey won't play in the casino because everybody suspects that Madsen's a cheater and has all these crime connections. You know, it begs the question, like, how has Madsen not been taken down or shamed by the community already if everybody thinks he's a crime lord?
Yeah, I mean, even guys like Howard Lederer left the poker world when they got involved in that scene. They didn't, you know, Ferguson did kind of come back in recent years and play, but Annie Duke, Lederer, long gone, for example, and so it's a good point you bring up there. With that big pot, obviously Matador has an even greater chunk of the chips in play as the number of tables are dwindling down. I believe they do mention how many players are left, and as the action winds down, so that does, you know, keep us knowing how far into the game that all of our guys are in. You know, we get this sort of half-assed, like, forced scene where Matador is like regretting like even shooting in the first place because playing straight for a whole day makes him think back to the good old days. It's like, dude, you're like literally killing everybody in Vegas. Don't try to make us feel like you're trying to be noble all of a sudden. That doesn't ring true at all.
And I think I brought this up the last time we spoke, but like, he's a great poker player. When we saw him play online poker before, he guessed the guy's exact hand. Why do you need to cheat? Right. You're phenomenal. Why do you need to do this?
Not to mention, I mean, when he's only cheating in games that like they have to draw, there's a whole process and it takes time, and it's not every day that these games that rigs happen. So if you're a profitable player, you know, over half the time, then you play enough times, and you're going to make more money playing regularly than playing semi-regularly with these cheating games, which are splitting the money like 10 ways with half of the city.
Yeah, and then one more poker thing is that they show Eddie at one of the outer tables with pocket threes, post flop with 3 overs. One of the horses goes all in, and Eddie thinks for a moment and calls, and then the horse hits the turn and doubles up. You know, so it's like, all right. I mean, I guess that's it's supposed to be reminiscent, I think, of the Chris Moneymaker call with the pocket threes. But again, it's just thrown in this episode sort of randomly. Doesn't Eddie losing chips doesn't really impact the plot at all. So it's why is this in here?
I think it's just kind of there to just add some more poker action and to just justify why maybe Eddie has fewer chips than Matador when action is dwindling down to fewer tables, I guess. But I didn't mind it as much. Compared to all the other useless scenes, this one technically ties into the tournament at least, so it's not as useless. It's all relatively speaking, though.
Yeah, I mean, yeah.
Other guest stars, though, this is Hellmuth's not the only notable guest star. We also have a Mike and Mike in the morning, that old team guest star in different bits here. So that was kind of surprising. I guess ESPN had a little bit of fun trying to find some small cameo roles to get some of their other members into. And then we mentioned that Matador sent Skip away to Lake Tahoe to get out of the danger zone. But Matador like teleports to Lake Tahoe all of a sudden and ends up waiting for him at the door when Skip arrives and ends up shooting him in the snow, like almost like Fargo. Like, what the heck? Like the timeline here again. We mentioned last time in the last podcast how the chronology of these scenes, not just Clark being fired here, but how did Matador get to Tahoe in time when he's playing poker and he has to play the next day? The time makes no sense.
Yeah, I mean, he's shown in his office talking to one of the casino employees, and that's where we get the, I felt like I was 25 years old again, playing by the rules type thing. Mm-hmm. And then we cut to Skip driving to this place. The distance between Lake Tahoe and Las Vegas, if you're driving, is more than 7 hours. So it's a long, long drive out there. And as I'm watching the guy drive up, I'm thinking, all right, he's going to get killed now. But when he opens the door and it's Madsen standing there, I mean, my jaw dropped. Because, okay, you have to beat him to the house because he's shown inside the house opening the door, right? So I guess he flew, but like you're in debt. How do you have a private plane? And then you have to hire a pilot. Doesn't that create a witness to your activity? Maybe you need to hire a co-pilot in order to do this. Can't you just send somebody else out to do this, especially if you're being followed by the police? You have this sheriff on your butt. I mean, why don't you have like a hit team go out and kill him? And it's also done in the most conspicuous, it's done outside the house in the snow. It's one of those moments where Madsen shoots him in the chest and Skip's crawling away and Madsen just gives some, long Madsen-esque speech. It's a dry cold creeping in, and I tell people all the time what I'm saying, and nobody ever listens to me. And then he, shoots the guy dead. And there's this terrible shot of, Madsen standing there and there's Skip dead in the snow, and it like pans out and pulls out, try to get this sort of grand sense of things. But it's too dark to see anything. Again, there's like light coming in through the trees, but you can barely see anything as the camera's pulling out. It's so stupid. It's so badly done.
It's bad. And again, Skip is not a character we care about. I mean, I argue of all the characters, Tropical Henry, Skip, I guess Seymour is the only death that I felt even like an iota of any sort of feeling towards his passing, because he was, as close to a benevolent character as it really could get in the show. And so the other guys just mean nothing, and therefore their death is supposed to be this big, he's so dark. He was just talking about being good in poker, now he's going to kill him. Like, they're trying to do some sort of contrast there. I don't freaking know.
Yeah, I mean, going into this last episode, I mean, like I liked the Phil Hellmuth stuff. I found that enjoyable. Mm-hmm. The FBI investigation feels like it's going somewhere. The cop is working with the FBI now. There's this one little moment where they're all like standing around a computer and they're like looking at some files related to this. And the sheriff sort of like flips through his notes. It's like, oh, that was the day Tropical Henry died. And they're like, oh, thanks, buddy. And he like smiles, and it's this like awkward, like smile. It just doesn't look real. But at least at least going into this episode, things are coming to a head. We have this tournament where the action is grounded, right? The players have to play this poker tournament. The stakes are pretty clear. They're all trying to win. How they're going to try to go about doing this makes sense. So it's like everything's going to be wrapped up. There's one episode. They surely can't introduce more characters, right?
Right? Right off the bat, episode 9, The Last Hand, the previously on segment doesn't show any of the actual like poker content. Like, what the heck? That's the best stuff, and you're not going to show any of it? Come on.
It's the point of the show. It's a poker show. There's no poker.
I mean, I guess that they want to pay any more royalties to Hellmuth. They don't want to have to pay him for 2 episodes or something. I don't know. I mean, come on. You extended the budget because of like how the show was looking. So come on, you can't afford a few extra dollars here for Hellmuth for a little, previously on. Like show the big hand where already bust him or something. Like, come on, it's terrible.
So bad.
Right off the bat. And then the opening scene of our season finale of this big poker tournament FBI investigation is Miami, who really has again the least sort of presence here in the tournament really so far. And she's like flirting with yet another random guy, all for the sake of some random FBI sting operation that has absolutely no relationship to anything that Miami has done up until this point. And the FBI just, again, this is not set up in the last episode. Why are they investigating this guy all of a sudden? It's all because of being about the Lake Tahoe situation. But why is this your opening scene of the finale? Come on.
Yeah, and there's a very, very cliched standard sort of interrogation scene where they're at like a wooden table and, there's the blaring lights coming down. And of course, Sad Sack's there, even though he's a sheriff and doesn't have jurisdiction in Las Vegas, but he's standing there in the background trying to look tough. And the FBI lady says, we know about you. You're with Matador. You go back all the way. But this character had never been mentioned before. We had no idea that this guy ever existed. If it was maybe alluded to in the past that this character existed, that would make sense. But this is a new character introduced in the last season, last episode, excuse me. It's just like,
I mean, at least Skip and Henry were introduced in episode 1, and so if it had been them, if the plot had been different up until this point, different story. But you're absolutely right about that. And again, we haven't really said it each time, but there were so many episodes where these new plots happen, these weird tangents, where there's new characters that are meant to be taken somewhat seriously that we don't need. We have our characters, let them do something important. Don't just dilute the action with more subplots and directions that we don't need. It's like this. So it's terrible.
It's just so bad.
Luckily, we get back to the poker action pretty early in the episode, thank God, where the action is where there's only 10 players left and we're on the final table bubble. And we get probably the second best guest star of the season in Mr. David Williams, who was the runner-up to Greg Raymer in the 04 main event. And so he actually, he acts just like how he did back in that main event. So again, he's pretty true to how he came across at the table. And he gets into a battle with Clark again on the bubble. So there are 2 different 5-handed tables. And again, all 3 of our trio are still in plus Matador. So they're all pretty close to the end there. And they get involved with a hand where Clark has 2 9s and Williams has 2 10s. A flop comes 9 deuce 6, and well, I think in a lot of situations, some people might actually fold the 10s in that spot. I do buy that 04 poker, 04 Williams might make the call there with the 10s, and the problem is, here's the problem of this scene is that Clark puts out a bet, and the graphics on the screen say he went all in, and then David Williams has to act. And then Clark has to act afterwards. So for about a good a minute and a half, maybe not for that, maybe like 45 seconds, the graphic says under Clark's name, all in, when he's not all in yet. I mean, anyone in the editing room watch this episode? I mean, come on.
Yeah, it's very sloppy. I mean, there have been occasional errors on the graphics in the WSOP, but nothing like that. And it ruins the tension of the scene. Mm-hmm. So it's just bad.
And so, of course, Williams has to hit a 2-outer to eliminate Clark, because we can't have all 3 of our heroes on the final table. So Clark goes out in 10th place, wins $200,000. So he's kind of happy, even though the master plan was to win the whole thing. So I don't know if he should be that happy yet, but there still has the 2 buddies up in there, I guess. I legit wasn't 100% sure who was going to win that hand. I thought you could have had a case where you wanted to have a cameo of David Williams maybe, and so he bubbles it. So I guess that was a little bit suspenseful in a small way, I suppose. But the episode, we're watching on DVD, so there's no commercial breaks. But the bookending scenes of an obvious break was someone drinking water. This is just very strange.
Yeah, it's very odd. And then so Clark busts. We're down to the final 9. Eddie and Miami are in. And for whatever reason, they think that the FBI is just going to barge into the casino in the middle of the tournament and arrest Madsen. So Clark says, I'll go tie up the FBI. And we actually see him going and tying up the FBI. what? I mean,
I'm not really sure how someone providing testimony would delay. Like, if a police are going to break down someone's door in an investigation,
yeah.
getting information is fine. Like, I've never seen an FBI investigation say we don't want more information, but it wouldn't delay things unless there's like a direct correlation to what he's saying to what. I'm not going to change how. Unless they say like, oh, there's a bomb in his door, so don't go in the house. Like, there's no reason to delay things.
And also, Clark could get charges for impeding with an investigation and lying to a cop. And also, I mean, just in general, like, you want to take Madsen down, right? Who cares if it's in the middle of a tournament? Who cares if I mean, I just don't get it. You could accidentally give information that distracts the investigators. Just, why are you doing this? Why are you calling attention to yourself?
Mm-hmm. And then the following scene has Matador's daughter offering to give a tell to Eddie on her father. And it's a scene that kind of at least provides some clarity on Eddie's view of the situation, where he calls her up and saying, "Oh, you're trying to give me a tell? That's not gonna work. I'm not gonna fall for it." But again, it just speaks to, she just has no reason for existing in this show if it doesn't play out in the final showdown. Eddie doesn't fall for it. So again, it's confusing as to what the point of her character was in the first place.
Well, there is a minor purpose, which we'll get to toward the end of the episode.
But how it relates to Eddie, though, makes no sense still.
Yeah, how it relates to Eddie just doesn't work. But yeah, I mean, we're down to the final 9. And here we go, final table. This is what everything's coming toward. And then they just show a bunch of players busting out in a montage. It's like, well, we're down to 5-handed. It's like, what? Like, I want to see this play out. I want some tension. You can play the whole episode like this.
That could have been awesome. You could have had, it's a 45-minute episode in real life. So you could have had 30 minutes of it, just of the final table, and then intercut with the other scenes. Because I guess I understand you got to have the other scenes in there too. But still, and instead it leads to a ridiculously exaggerated scene where it ends with Eddie versus Matador versus Miami, where they have aces, 10s, and 9-8, where Matador flops a queen high straight with the 9-8. Miami has bottom sets, and Eddie has aces over to the board. The turn's a king, and so Miami decides, I'm going to call a bottom set on a 4-liner board.
Yeah.
And the implication was that she was trying to win. It wasn't on purpose or anything. But any sane player, there's literally no hand you're beating when besides a complete bluff. And it's not a board you want to bluff on. And you're just even 3 jacks could be a bluff there. I mean, it's an absolutely terrible call for the supposed great player that made it into 5th place.
Yeah, it's really bad. I mean, I don't know if it was trying to say that Miami was like emotionally tilted or whatever and wanted to get Everest. I don't know. It's just it doesn't land. It doesn't work. It comes out of nowhere right after you've had this very quick montage of a bunch of players busting. Like,
yeah. I mean, because we all knew watching this episode that it was going to be Eddie against Matador and heads up. We knew that, but you could have at least, it would have been pretty cool if it had been Miami against Everest at the very end. That would have been unique. That would have been a genuine plot twist that I wouldn't have seen coming. But no, of course not.
No, I mean, the one thing that they get kind of realistic, I guess, I don't know, is like Norman Chad interviews Miami afterward, but the interview, again, is just too abbreviated. Like, he asks 2 questions, like, how did you feel about that? Miami doesn't answer and then just walks away. So more Norman Chad action, that's nice. That's the one thing.
Because the actual, how they present this main event as if it's happening live, but then as it's edited, which is, again, not how it was done in 04, 05. It kind of feels more like the whole 2019.
Right.
Of it, which again we didn't like, but that's a different situation there. And what's weird is that Miami busted 5th place, but she busted the player who lost in 6th place, so she was still short stacked even after she knocked out a player, which I also didn't feel quite right, considering how it seemed like it was almost right after.
Yeah, it doesn't make it. They probably didn't think that through. It's just that simple.
But again, so after Miami busts, obviously there's a bit of a break in the poker action for a little bit. And then we kind of get, again, probably top 5 in the worst scenes in the history of this show is where, because of the FBI's investigation, the head of the Las Vegas PD is starting to catch wind of him being implicated in this whole mess. And so he finds out from one of his, underlings in the office that someone wants to see him. And it's just some of the most overly dramatic, like acting and by everyone in this scene involved, and he fakes putting like a gun in his mouth, like as if he's gonna kill himself because he'd rather die than be exposed for being corrupt. And then he ends up, instead of killing himself, going out his window, kind of like in Fargo. Like it was just the dumbest thing. Only this time he gets out of the window and like William Rich Macy.
It cuts to the scene after the poker action. I mean, we were just so surprised watching this because it just comes out of nowhere. The sheriff, there had been no mention that the sheriff of Las Vegas was being interviewed by anybody or anything. We mentioned a while back though he killed Tropical Henry, and they had like one scene where he was talking to Madsen. It's like, it says, "I've never shot somebody," and that was it. There's no build up to this. It just comes out of nowhere, and then it just cuts him with a gun in his hand. And he's leaving a voicemail for his wife. He's like, "Honey, I love you so much. You know, I'm so sorry to have to put you through this." And he puts the gun in his mouth, and he's going like acting his heart out. And he doesn't just flee through a window; he flees through his bathroom window. What? A sheriff's office? A guy has a attached bathroom in his office? What? Where is this?
And I didn't get the vibe that this whole like scene was related to him actually killing Henry. It was more related to how it all tied into the Matador's sort of corporation here. So that seemed odd. Like at least if it was specifically the Henry's murder, that was a bit more personal for him. But it wasn't, and if it was meant to be, it wasn't clear.
Yeah, it just doesn't work at all. And then we see him later talking to one, Lowball or somebody else, and he's, telling him, "Oh, they're going to arrest Madsen. You got my back, right?" And the casino guy's like, "Yeah, I got your back," and that's it. It's very strange.
Very bad. As the things shift back to the casino, Matador gives his estate to his daughter because he gets wind that he's going to be arrested after the tournament, probably, if not before. And so he wants to get his affairs in order. That way, everything is ready for him once he gets out of trouble. And as we cut back to the poker action, we get down to three-handed as Matador, as Eddie busts Kadinsky with Ace King against Queens, and then Matador tries to offer some of the money to Eddie in exchange for wanting to win the bracelet. And Eddie actually counter offers for 3/4 of the money, and it would have been pretty funny if that was like a legit offer. But of course, he's not going to take it. But it was a funny little bit, I guess, there. But we get again the cop comes back, the Las Vegas cop, and he can't even fast walk convincingly. Like when he's leaving the room, it's just he cannot act for his life. They just had like a mold for like an older cop figure that would fit the profile, and they didn't care how much of an actor he was.
Yeah, it's trying to make it seem so tense, but it's just not tense at all. And yeah, Michael Madsen, I mean, that scene with his daughter is just terrible acting from him. It's supposed to be this big emotional moment. Madsen goes, "You're all I got," that one of the sort of things. But also, I mean, the last couple scenes we've seen with Madsen and his daughter, he's angry at her for sleeping with Eddie, and then she walks in on him having sex with a Russian hooker. Like there's no sense of paternal love for his daughter anywhere.
Absolutely. And then we get, again, the poker action in this episode is so extreme that it's kind of sickening because to get down to heads up play, David Williams has pocket aces against Matador's kings on a 10-high flop. Williams shoves, Matador calls. So yeah, great job, Matador, reading him, I guess. And a king comes on the river to bust Williams in third place, which actually leads to probably the best David Williams specific moment where he kind of throws in a Josh Ari reference where he says, "Bust this guy, everyone's rooting for you," which is again how Ari said to Williams himself when Raymer was heads up with him heading into the for the bracelet in 04. So that was kind of a small little nice thing. Again, a little bit of authenticity to it that these last couple episodes did bring to the script.
Yeah, and as another little authenticity, they actually bring the $5 million over and put it on the table, except the prop money looks really fake. It looks white, not green like real money is. I'm aware that the money that's actually put on the table is $100 bills and then one's in the middle. That's not what I mean by fake. I mean, it actually doesn't look like real money.
But again, David Williams and Phil Hellmuth definitely each add a level of enjoyment to this for nostalgia's sake. So that was kind of nice here. And then we actually get to the heads up play, where we don't really, again, we see one hand of it really, unfortunately. Like there's no real like it's kind of like the old main events where they show like one hand heads up and then the final hand would happen afterwards. Like pretty analogous actually. Matador gets ace king suited against Eddie's sixes. The flop comes ace king six. In case you didn't, I know you called it. You called it before the hand played out. The flop was going to be ace king six, and you were 100% right about that. And it's not good when your big climactic moment of a show is that easily to predict. That's just not a good sign.
Yeah, and I mean Eddie's got a set, so he makes it 4 million. Everest decides to shove over him. I mean, there was a line of dialogue right before the scene played out that something like Eddie had like a slight chip lead over Everest. I mean, it just doesn't. I don't think a shove there makes sense. I understand that Ace King two pair is a strong hand, but why don't you want to set Eddie up? Maybe he has a weaker ace, maybe he has mid pair, something else. I just doesn't work.
Or you want to bet small so that like Queen Jack calls or something. I mean, it's every winning a heads up is hard. You can't win unless they put money in the pot, and you have to have the best hand for that to matter. So it's just silly. But now we learn afterwards that it didn't really matter if he won or lost because Matador was going to win no matter what.
Right.
I agree. But it's still just again from a poker authenticity standpoint, it didn't ring true.
And also Eddie tanks for a very long time, and they have this like weird moment where Eddie can almost, I don't know how to describe this effect where he can see through the cards and he's wondering what he has. Yeah. It's bottom set, heads up. You're gonna call every time.
Not to mention, I mean, they used that same trick, I think, in episode 1 when he was playing against the Thorn or in the boxing ring match. So it was, I guess, a callback to that. But had you at least built that, like every episode he thinks a hand through like that, at least you're showing us some of his poker and analytic skills in play. But to only use it twice the whole season just kind of means it all doesn't amount to much at all. And again, he's just supposedly the greatest Stu Unger player of his generation. Like, no, cooler after cooler is not amazing poker play. Anybody could have played those cards and then had the same result.
Yeah, and then I mean he wins, and Matador just has this big smile on his face, and the two of them talk, and that's when it's revealed the daughter has bet on Eddie to win the tournament. So Matador actually has more money than Eddie is, which is kind of funny. Yes. But I mean, Eddie doesn't seem super excited when he wins. Like there's kind of one moment where he's sort of like doubled over, sort of like seemingly happy. But as he's holding up the bracelet and all that, again, the acting just doesn't stick this moment. Here's the happiest moment of your life and nothing.
Well, actors tend to like get into the head of the characters that they're portraying, but really we don't really know what this tournament means to Eddie. I mean, he lost that. He argued he had Miami had a bit more of a personal stick against Matador from the past, but really, I mean, Eddie he overplayed 2 queens against 2 kings. I mean, that's not exactly a compelling origin story for anybody. When he had dowdy issues, but that's not unrelated entirely. So again, it didn't feel like a complete main character's journey was being finalized here.
Yeah, and then the last sort of scene we have of the gang together is they're off drinking Bud Light, which they made sure to show is just, essentially the equivalent of this, just like Bud Light. And Eddie mentioned that he's going to go off to Europe to play poker, I guess. And he's left Miami and Clark some money in these suitcases, which would be very bulky and conspicuous to carry around. But whatever, that's sort of the last time we see the three of them is he's given them like $500,000 each of them out of 5 million, which is very strange.
Well, no, I actually think that he gave $500,000 to the friend.
Okay.
And then that leaves 4.5 million. So I assume they gave him like 1.5 each, just to be a split. I think that was probably the idea there. Of course, that's not taxed yet, so I'm not sure how they're going to pay the taxes. But I guess shouldn't think about that. The problem is that scene is fine, I guess. The problem is we have some absolutely horrible scenes of everybody else as things wrap up because the FBI is waiting to arrest Everest right as the tournament's ending. They get him. The FBI cuffs him, and then our female FBI agent intentionally uncuffs him as part of this deal with Sad Sack that he's going to give him 5 minutes to have a fist fight with him in the bathroom before they take him to jail. What the heck? What kind of like contract under the table FBI deal did they strike to make that happen? That makes no sense either.
And also, nobody notices Madsen getting arrested. There only seems to be 2 reporters at this event that take photos of Eddie, but nobody else seems to notice that the guy who just got second place at this tournament, who's supposedly one of the biggest, poker players of all time, is getting arrested. It's very strange.
And we don't actually see the fist fight. but both Madsen and Sadsack are shown with like little like fake injuries and stuff. So we don't, and Sadsack, we've seen him win a few fist fights earlier, so I guess he won that fight too. I don't even know. That's very strange.
And then there's a scene where he goes back home and he's like, "Hey, I'm home," and then the kids run in, and it looks like a really terrible set, and it's very cliched.
Mm-hmm.
Very bad.
In the background, Lowball regains his seat at the casino table. He's kind of like, his Matador was kind of the impetus for him getting pushed out. Now he's back in, so he's back where he began. So his character, the little character he had, has not changed one iota in this entire season either. So I'm glad we spent so much time with him, dominatrixes and all the drinks at the TV, all the security camera footage he was watching stuff. I'm glad we had all that.
Yep, and then we get one last scene with Michael Madsen, who's outside of a courtroom or something. He's like on a staircase. It's very strange. He comes down these stairs, and there's his lawyer there, and there's a bunch of reporters taking photographs of him. Right. And the lawyer is like, "Hey, my client, these accusations are false against my client. He's one of the greatest poker players of all time. We're going to acquit him." And then you see Madsen walking away, and then just cuts very quickly. So that's that scene.
And so the big final like cliffhanger ending, like, oh my god, I can't, how they're gonna get out of this mess next is the supposed like FBI sting witness that Miami tricked in the first scene was in like witness protection or whatever. He's shown having hung himself. So, and he was apparently like the key linchpin in this whole case. It's all based upon that one witness. Nothing else matters. None of Sadsack's evidence or the Las Vegas cop or any, none of that matters at all. Because he's dead, that's going to get Matador off the schneid for season 2. Like that was the big like smoking gun snuffed out. Like no.
So if you're keeping track at home, you may notice that the mysterious guy that calls Clark never gets explained. Did you notice that we haven't talked about the Saw 6 guy in a while? He pops up in the story a couple times. We see him interact with Miami a couple times. That never gets explained. We have some shot of Madsen's daughter just sort of standing there watching Eddie, but that whole thing's never wrapped up. We're not sure if she leaves town or not. It's not conveyed properly. The church guy who introduces that guy that's not actually dead or whatever, that never really gets explained. Also, Seymour they kind of like give a toast at the end, to Seymour, but that's really about it. No emotional impact of this character who was their mentor dying for 6 episodes. It's just insane.
It's insane. And again, it just didn't feel like they knew in the slightest what they were doing. And that's only further emblemized by both the bonus features in this DVD. We have an alternate ending and then deleted scenes. So alternate ending, we both agreed was definitely superior than the actual ending, although it felt almost more like a deleted scene than an alternate ending at times, because the only difference is that instead of the scene where Sadsack returns home and his family greets him, we get his family gets killed by one of Matador's goonies, and then off screen we don't see it in the ending that Sadsack learns of this, and so during the press conference staircase scene, Sadsack arrives and shoots Everest with a gun, and oh no, is Everest going to survive the gunshot? We have no idea.
Yeah, and he gets arrested there, and that's sort of the cliffhanger. And yeah, it's a better cliffhanger because it's 2 characters we know about, and they have this interaction with each other, and it's, did he live or not? What's going to happen next? That's a little bit more intriguing than some guy who was literally introduced this episode getting killed. I imagine they went with the other ending because they wanted to have Chris Bauer more freedom for his character, but it's still bad.
It's bad. And then the deleted scenes, it's organized in that Ron Wetzler will introduce a quick scene, and then it'll cut to that scene as it plays out. And for the most part, his commentary on why a scene was cut pretty much falls into the same couple of categories. It was a too slow a scene. It didn't fit in with the vibe of the show, or we just didn't feel like it was important to when we had other stuff that we could have put in instead. And most of these scenes are pretty useless, but I actually almost thought that one subsection of these scenes could have at least had some utility in the show. But of course, we're not part of the decision making there.
Yeah, just a potpourri of different scenes. There's another scene with what's Madsen's buddy who dies at the end of the season finale being interviewed by the FBI lady, and it's supposed to show him flipping. There's another scene of Madsen just chewing gum and then leaving, which when is this supposed to have taken place? And then there's another scene where it is suggested that Madsen is not actually the daughter's father. When they were the guy was introducing the scene, I turned to Ben, I just completely turned my whole body, and I just shot him the most confused look I've ever had in my entire life. I just cannot believe that they were going to throw this scene into the last episode of the season.
It's bad. Now, there's a few scenes where we actually have Seymour's daughter, Ellen, meet with Miami, and they go to a funeral home and they talk a little bit. And I thought there could have been something there at least, because the Miami Seymour connection is probably the closest thing to real emotion that the show ever really gets to. And so if you had those scenes in there, you could develop that a bit more and had a bit more of a idea of Seymour's presence in Miami's life and how his death impacts her and how it affects her future actions. But by just completely cutting out those scenes, it just really left nothing for Miami to really do for the whole show. Literally, her entire role is she talks to some guys. She kind of acts flirtatiousness or kind of like talks about the past with them, and nothing else amounts to it. So,
yeah, it's just. It would have been better because her character has a little bit more to do. But I mean, even then, these scenes are just not very good. There's an explanation for why Miami's nickname is Miami, and it was given to her by Seymour. And supposedly the logic is Miami is a sunny person, and you cannot win against a player named after a city. Okay.
Pretty bad. And so, when you hear Ron Lester describe why a scene was used or not used, yeah, you can obviously see that they put some thought into what went into a scene or into an episode, but it's clear that their thought process to begin with was flawed because they just didn't know what would make good or bad television to begin with.
Yeah, I mean, one of the problems that I've mentioned throughout our two videos here is Tilt has too fast of a pace. There's not enough time to really let scenes settle in and develop. So him saying over and over again, we cut the scene out because it was too slow, our pacing's more quick, just confirms that they really had no idea what they were doing at all.
Right. I completely agree.
Yeah.
And I did like that they explained why they cut a scene. That's kind of cool because you don't always hear that with deleted scenes. Some shows just kind of have a montage of each scene back to back, and you don't really know. So even though it's a pretty dumb thing, it was still kind of fun to hear their crazy reasons for why they would cut a scene. The outtakes are just a few line flubs here and there, and then Madsen at one point wearing a red peacock hat once, kind of as a joke. Again, nothing all that funny. It's not a comedy. I feel like outtakes are funnier in comedy when they kind of like flub a joke or something, or they do an alternate version of a line or something like that. In a drama, that doesn't really work for me.
Yep, and then the commentary was just for episode 1. It's with Brian Koppelman and David Livian, who were the co-creators of the show, and also I think wrote episode 1 and also wrote Rounders. And yeah, again, as I said, they really just had no idea what they were doing, had no self-awareness. Multiple times they mentioned that they managed to get budget increases from ESPN, which is just crazy. I mean, they talk about how Chris Bauer was somebody they always wanted to work with, and his character is supposed to be the heart of the show.
And then they mentioned that Miami is meant to be this almost like a fantasy character, like this idealized woman of a character. Like, I can tell that because you didn't give her anything really to do, and anything she did was just completely. Well, I mean, she gets 5th place to Eddie, so she didn't even hold her own in the tournament or anything. She just didn't amount to much as a character, and she's the only female in the main cast too, so it doesn't help things either.
Yeah, the telltale line of the commentaries, one of them goes, "We weren't going to reveal everything as it happened, and it was okay if it was a little confusing," referring to the pilot, which is one of the most confusing episodes of television I've ever seen.
I mean, they admit to the obligatory strip club scene. They mention how they actually filmed a little bit in Vegas, and the majority of it was in Toronto at the fake casino they created. They had every few minutes they're always hyping up like one member of the crew, like, oh, we want to get the best in the business, like, and really I mean, that's just not very insightful for a commentary anyway. Like, give us some, information on what might have been cut or what they would have liked to have done. They're way too self-congratulatory in the commentary too.
Yeah, and they tell this long story about the guy who plays Skip and how excited he was to meet Madsen, and it goes on for like 45 seconds. It's very annoying. Yeah, it's just bad.
Probably the best part of the commentary was they actually acknowledged the nickname overlap of Carlos Mortensen, who was also called the Matador, but they did get permission, so they didn't have, as they were going to change Matador's name to the Mountain if that didn't come through. So that was at least the one thing I definitely wanted to hear from them, which they mentioned it.
Yeah, so hopefully he got paid.
And so I think that about concludes our comprehensive discussion of this awful show, Tilt. I personally, as much as I've hated the show, again, it falls into the room level of bad, like, entertaining off of its own demerits, not off its own merits. And I'm glad that we managed to do this together and just sort of slowly watch one by one what goes into a horrible TV show.
Yeah, if there's any video essayists out there that are looking to make long form videos, kind of like your movie sucks or I hate everything or anything, this is your property right here, because this property, again, nobody else has talked about this on YouTube, really seems to have been forgotten about. And you could just talk about so many things, the technical aspects, the acting, the writing, everything. Nothing works. Just nothing. They clearly thought they were going to get a season 2. Apparently almost got a season 2, according to one source I read, but for production reasons, they didn't make it. It's so appalling how little self-awareness they had, yet how much effort they put into it. Right. They clearly thought they had something going. They mentioned in the commentary how they wrote certain lines because they wanted people to quote these lines at the poker table. So everything's super flowery. It's just unbelievable how bad this is. But it's fun. Like, it's really fun.
And again, the best part of the show is Phil Hellmuth, both just for just his authenticity and for the fact that it's Hellmuth on TV. I don't think that necessarily our discussion of it does the show justice, because you have to really watch the show to fully understand why the scenes don't flow together, or why so many scenes are useless, or why so many things just don't work. So if you ever get a chance to at least watch the first couple of episodes that are on YouTube, you'll probably see what we're talking about. You can find this DVD probably on Amazon or eBay or something. We can always maybe give away as a prize to with our autograph or something, to maybe a winner to one of our viewers if any of them can bust us in the Mindsport Olympiad or something like that. That'd be kind of cool. But definitely, if you love bad TV, this is definitely up your alley. And if you are a poker fanatic like us, you'll also appreciate just how bad the poker action is too.
Yeah, I bought it on Amazon, so you should be able to find it. If we can all just get Poker Go to put this on their platform, and maybe if we're lucky and persistent, get them to make season 2, that would be off the charts. I'm a copywriter. I'll write season 2. You can bring back all the original cast. None of these guys have done much in the intervening years. I'm sure they'll if there's a paycheck, they'll do it. So let's season 2 of Tilts. Let's get it to go.
And we'll write it for them. I think we were always every episode thinking about how we would have written an episode differently, how we would have reorganized the show. I think that would be still far more successful than this crap, and that's my take on that.
Absolutely.
But we would be remiss to not discuss the Mindsport Olympiad, the warm-up event, not the true proper start of the series, but a event nonetheless began yesterday. I had the fortune of at least playing the first 20 minutes or so. I had a scheduling problem, so I couldn't do the whole thing. But getting our feet wet, I finished in 5th place out of 8 players. Yep. And you managed to play a little longer than me. How did it go for you?
I finished in 4th, so just out of the medal consideration. This was just an informal event. It's not for medals or MSO points or anything. This was just essentially to test out the platform. Right. I think it was 5 minutes levels with 3K starting chips, and the starting level was 1020. So I
think it was 1530.
Oh, sorry, 1530, yeah. So I won a couple hands at first, and then the blinds just got too big, and I couldn't really improve. Right. And then I shoved with ace 10, and the guy called me with king 6, and he flopped a 6, and that was it. It was good to play with all the players mentioned. I can't remember what exactly their names were, but I recognized almost all of them from last year, so it's good to see them back. And yeah, again, it's a very fun event, the MSO, all sorts of different games and stuff going on. And the MSO this year is taking place over 6 weeks. So there's plenty of time to pick what events you want to play and then go play them. And the medals are really beautiful and well done. So it starts tomorrow. So let's go.
Tomorrow is the 7-card stud event. I have work that day tomorrow, so I won't be able to play beyond the first couple of levels there, but we'll be there. And if you give us a shout out during the play, you can be eligible to win this signed complete box set of the show Tilt from us, and you can relive our misery on your own time in your comfort of your own home.
Not misery. It's I could watch this show. I would watch the show again right now. I mean, this was a lot of fun. I mean, again, I wrote 13 pages of notes, so you know.
And so I wanted to tease a future episode of our podcast. Well, we haven't discussed what content we're going to discuss next yet. I have the early stages of planning an interview of someone very important to the poker world who has been name dropped at some point during this podcast recording today. And I'm hoping to time it with episode number 50. And if you can, multiply 50 by, say, 1,000 or 10,000 or something, you get a number, and maybe they won that much in the main event sometime. I'm not quite sure, but keep your eyes peeled for an upcoming episode of our podcast, ladies and gentlemen.
Yeah, I'm already preparing for the interview, so I'm already taking notes and everything. So it's going to be exciting. And then if you're at all interested in being on the show in any capacity, whatever it is, let us know in the comments. We're happy to have Mind Sport Olympiad people on too, and we'll ask you questions. And then any suggestions for content, Ben and I are open to that. Movies you want us to see us review, poker shows, streams, whatever it is, let us know, and we'll get going on that.
Yeah, so until guys, this was a long one, but thank you for sticking around with us. We'll see you next time. Enjoy your poker, enjoy your TV, enjoy your poker on TV.
And remember, don't be on tilt.